Bloodborne lore to sleep, to vertical bar Gehrman, the first hunter, and his eternal prison. Welcome back to another journey into the deepest mysteries of gaming lore, where we explore the most haunting tales ever crafted. Tonight we venture into a story that transcends mere horror to touch something far more profound. A tale of sacrifice so complete that it echoes through dimensions beyond mortal understanding. We speak of Gehrman the first hunter, whose tragedy makes even the cosmic entities weep tears of otherworldly sorrow. In the ethereal realm known as the hunter's dream stands a figure bent by more than age, more than time itself. Here in this sanctuary that doubles as the most exquisite prison ever conceived, sits an old man in a wheelchair, surrounded by white flowers that bloom in soil touched by moonlight. These blossoms carry the weight of countless memories. Each petal holds the echo of a hunter who came seeking purpose and found only the inevitability of their own doom. But this is not merely a story of one man's suffering. This is the chronicle of how the greatest hunter who ever lived became trapped in a bargain that saved humanity while condemning his own soul to eternal servitude. How a craftsman's dedication to protecting the innocent and transformed into an endless vigil over forces that mortal minds cannot comprehend. How love became loss, how heroism became horror, how salvation became the cruelest form of damnation imaginable. What you are about to hear spans centuries of hidden history, buried beneath the blood-soaked streets of Gehrman, a tale that begins with noble intentions and descends through layers of cosmic horror until we reach the heart of a mystery that challenges our understanding of sacrifice itself. For Gehrman's story is not simply about what he became, but about what he gave up. Not just what he gained, but what he lost. Not just how he lived, but how he learned to die. 1,000 deaths while remaining forever beyond the reach of true rest. Tonight we will walk through the hunter's dream garden, where time moves differently and memories take physical form. We will discover how a simple craftsman became the most feared and respected warrior in human history. We will witness the moment when otherworldly powers noticed his strength and decided that such capability must never be allowed to truly die. We will uncover the price he paid for power, and the even greater price he pays for the knowledge of what that power has cost. Others, the man you will come to know was once someone's student, someone's teacher, someone's hope for a better world. He was flesh and blood and dreams, just like any of us. But the cosmos has a way of selecting certain individuals for roles that transcend mortal existence. Some are chosen for greatness, others are chosen for sacrifice. Gehrman was chosen for both, and in accepting that dual burden he became something that exists between worlds, neither fully alive nor properly dead, neither completely human nor entirely other. In the depths of night, when the boundary between dream and nightmare grows thin, you might catch a glimpse of his true nature, a figure of infinite sadness, carrying responsibilities that would crush lesser souls. He tends his garden of memory, while watching over hunters who believe they are choosing their own paths. He offers guidance, knowing that most who receive it are already doomed. He provides weapons, understanding that they will likely be turned against him in the end. This is the paradox of his existence, to serve as both salvation and final test for those he most wishes to protect. But why does he remain in this impossible position when beings of cosmic power surely possess the ability to free themselves from any earthly obligation? What keeps him bound to his wheelchair in that moonlit garden when he could step through dimensions as easily as walking between rooms? We see it. Is as quine between human says. Is walking between rooms. The answer lies in the deepest truth about heroism itself. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is not the dramatic gesture that saves the day, but the quiet decision to bear an unbearable burden so that others need not carry it themselves. What we will uncover together in the hours ahead is a story that begins in the workshops and streets of old Gehrman and ends in realms where human concepts of time and space break down entirely. We will trace the path from skilled craftsman to legendary hunter to cosmic prisoner. We will understand how each choice he made led inevitably to the next, until he found himself caught in a web of obligation that spans multiple realities. We will learn why the moon presence selected him above all others for this role, and what it truly means to be the first hunter in a world where hunting never ends. So settle in as we begin this epic exploration of sacrifice and servitude, of love and loss, of the thin line between salvation and damnation. This is the story of Gehrman and his eternal vigil, a tale that will take us through blood-soaked battlefields and ethereal gardens, through moments of triumph and endless nights of sorrow, through the very heart of what it means to be human, in a universe where humanity itself is under constant threat. The hunt never truly ends, but tonight we hunt for understanding. We seek the truth behind the legend. We pursue the man behind the myth. And in doing so, we may discover that the greatest monsters are not the beasts that prowl in shadows, but the circumstances that force good people to become things they never intended to be. Welcome back to another journey into the deepest mysteries of gaming lore, where we explore the most haunting tales ever crafted. Tonight we venture into a story that transcends mere horror, or to touch something far more profound. A tale of sacrifice so complete that it echoes through dimensions beyond mortal understanding. We speak of Gehrman, the first hunter, whose tragedy makes even the cosmic entities weep tears of otherworldly sorrow. In the ethereal realm known as the hunter's dream stands a figure bent by more than age, more than time itself. Here in this sanctuary that doubles as the most exquisite prison ever conceived, sits an old man in a wheelchair surrounded by white flowers that bloom in soil touched by moonlight. These blossoms carry the weight of countless memories. Each petal holds the echo of a hunter who came seeking purpose and found only the inevitability of their own doom. But this is not merely a story of one man's suffering. This is the chronicle of how the greatest hunter who ever lived became trapped in a bargain that saved humanity, while condemning his own soul to eternal servitude. How a craftsman's dedication to protecting the innocent transformed into an endless vigil over forces that mortal minds cannot comprehend. How love became loss. How heroism became horror. How salvation became the cruelest form of damnation imaginable. What you are about to hear spans centuries of hidden history, buried beneath the blood-soaked streets of Gehrman. A tale that begins with noble intentions and descends through layers of cosmic horror until we reach the heart of a mystery that challenges our understanding of sacrifice itself. For Gehrman's story is not simply about what he became, but about what he gave up. Not just what he gained, but what he lost. Not just how he lived, but how he learned to die, 1,000 deaths while remaining forever beyond the reach of true rest. Tonight we will walk through the hunter's dream garden, where time moves differently and memories take physical form, or we will discover how a simple craftsman became the most feared and respected warrior in human history. We will witness the moment when otherworldly powers noticed his strength and decided that such capability must never be allowed to truly die. We will uncover the price he paid for power and the even greater price he pays for the knowledge of what that power has cost others. The man you will come to know was once someone's student, someone's teacher, someone's hope for a better world. He was flesh and blood, and dreams just like any of us. But the cosmos has a way of selecting certain individuals for roles that transcend mortal existence. Some are chosen for greatness, others are chosen for sacrifice. Gehrman was chosen for both, and in accepting that dual burden he became something that exists between worlds, neither fully alive nor properly dead, neither completely human nor entirely other. In the depths of night, when the boundary between dream and nightmare grows thin, you might catch a glimpse of his true nature, a figure of infinite sadness, carrying responsibilities that would crush lesser souls. He tends his garden of memory, while watching over hunters who believe they are choosing their own paths. He offers guidance, knowing that most who receive it are already doomed. He provides weapons, understanding that they will likely be turned against him in the end. This is the paradox of his existence. to serve as both salvation and final test for those he most wishes to protect. But why does he remain in this impossible position when beings of cosmic power surely possess the ability to free themselves from any earthly obligation? What keeps him bound to his wheelchair in that moonlit garden, when he could step through dimensions as easily as walking between rooms? The answer lies in the deepest truth about heroism itself. Sometimes, the greatest act of courage is not the dramatic gesture that saves the day, but the quiet decision to bear an unbearable burden so that others need not carry it themselves. What we will uncover together in the hours ahead is a story that begins in the workshops and streets of old Gehrman and ends in realms where human concepts of time and space break down entirely. We will trace the path from skilled craftsman to legendary hunter to cosmic prisoner. We will trace the path from skilled craftsman to legendary hunter to cosmic prisoner. We will understand how each choice he made led inevitably to the next, until he found himself caught in a web of obligation that spans multiple realities. We will learn why the moon presence selected him above all others for this role and what it truly means to be the first hunter in a world where hunting never ends. So settle in as we begin this epic exploration of sacrifice and servitude, of love and loss, of the thin line between salvation and damnation. This is the story of Gehrman and his eternal vigil, a tale that will take us through blood-soaked battlefields and ethereal gardens, through moments of triumph and endless nights of sorrow, through the very heart of what it means to be human in a universe where humanity itself is under constant threat. The hunt never truly ends, but tonight we hunt for understanding. We seek the truth behind the legend. We pursue the man behind the myth. And in doing so, we may discover that the greatest monsters are not the beasts that prowl in shadows, but the circumstances that force good people to become things they never intended to be. In the time before Gehrman knew the taste of cosmic horror, there lived a man whose hands possessed an almost supernatural understanding of steel and wood, and the precise balance required to create instruments of perfect lethality. Gehrman was not born to greatness, as legends often claim their heroes to be. He emerged from the common folk of the region surrounding what would one day become the most cursed city in human history. His early years were marked not by prophecy or divine signs, but by the simple dedication of a craftsman who believed that anything worth making was worth making perfectly. The workshops of those days rang with the sound of honest labor, as Gehrman learned his trade under masters who had inherited their skills from generations of weaponsmiths, stretching back to times when the greatest threats facing humanity were other humans wielding conventional arms. He showed an aptitude that went beyond mere technical proficiency, where other apprentices saw only metal and mechanism. Gehrman perceived the deeper harmonies that governed the relationship between wielder and weapon. He understood instinctively that a blade was not merely a tool but an extension of its user's will and intent. His reputation grew slowly at first, as word spread among the fighting men of the region about a young craftsman whose weapons seemed to possess qualities that transcended their physical materials. Swords that held their edge longer than physics should allow, axes that struck with force that seemed to multiply the strength of their wielders, firearms that shot straighter and farther than their design specifications could account for. Those who commissioned weapons from Gehrman found themselves possessing advantages in combat that they could not entirely explain, but were certainly grateful to experience. But it was not merely his skill as a craftsman that would elevate Gehrman to legendary status. In those early days, when strange reports began filtering in from the ancient ruins beneath what would become Gehrman, he demonstrated a quality that would prove far more valuable than technical expertise. When faced with threats that defied conventional understanding, he possessed the rare combination of analytical thinking and intuitive adaptation that allowed him to develop effective responses to unprecedented challenges. The first recorded encounter between Gehrman and the otherworldly threats emerging from the Pinthumerian ruins occurred during what official church records would later classify as a routine archaeological expedition. The scholars from Bergenworth had requested protection for their research teams venturing into chambers that local superstition warned against disturbing. Most of the hired guards were conventional soldiers whose training had prepared them for human opponents, following predictable patterns of behavior and motivation. When the expedition encountered their first watcher, a creature that had once been Pulthumerian nobility, but had undergone transformations that rendered it barely recognizable as having ever been humanoid, the conventional guards responded with tactics appropriate for fighting other humans. They attempted to use formation fighting and coordinated attacks based on assumptions about how their opponent would move and react. These assumptions proved catastrophically incorrect, as the Watcher moved according to principles that human military doctrine had never contemplated. Gehrman alone among the guards recognized that conventional tactics were not merely ineffective, but actively dangerous, when applied to opponents whose capabilities and motivations operated outside human parameters. While his colleagues fell back in confusion and terror, he stepped forward to study the creature's movement patterns and attack sequences. What he observed in those crucial moments would form the foundation of everything that would later be called hunter combat doctrine. The Watcher moved with purpose, but not human purpose. Its attacks followed patterns, but not patterns based on human anatomy or psychology. It possessed intelligence, but intelligence that had been shaped by experiences and perspectives that no human mind could fully comprehend. Most importantly, it seemed to operate according to a form of awareness that transcended normal sensory perception, suggesting that conventional approaches to stealth and tactical surprise would be useless against such opponents. In that first encounter, Gehrman developed what would become the core principles of hunter methodology: speed over strength, because these creatures possessed physical capabilities that no human could match through direct contest; precision over power, because their alien anatomy meant that conventional vital points might not exist, or might not be located where human experience would suggest; adaptability over rigid doctrine, because each encounter would likely present unique challenges that predetermined responses could not address. But perhaps most importantly, Gehrman recognized that fighting such creatures required a fundamental shift in psychological approach. The fear and revulsion that normal humans experienced when confronted with otherworldly threats were not character flaws to be overcome through discipline and training. They were rational responses to genuine existential dangers that threatened not just physical survival, but psychological integrity and spiritual coherence. Any human who could function effectively against such threats would need to undergo preparations that went far beyond conventional military training. The weapon that Gehrman created for himself during this period would become the template for all subsequent hunter armaments. The burial blade represented a revolutionary approach to combat tool design that incorporated his understanding of otherworldly opponent characteristics and the unique requirements of fighting creatures that operated outside normal physical laws. The blade could transform between different configurations to address the varied tactical situations that hunter work would inevitably present. More than its mechanical innovations, the burial blade embodied Gehrman's philosophical approach to the hunter's role in human society. It was not primarily a weapon of war designed to destroy enemies in service of political or economic objectives. It was an instrument of mercy, created to end the suffering of beings that had been transformed beyond the possibility of conventional existence. The scythe configuration spoke to the hunter's role as harvester of corrupted life that could no longer be considered truly alive. The success of this first expedition, and Gehrman's critical role in its completion, brought him to the attention of church authorities, who were beginning to understand that their research activities would require protection from threats that conventional security forces could not address. The partnership that developed between Gehrman and the Healing Church would prove to be one of the most significant relationships in the history of both institutions, though neither party could have anticipated the cosmic implications of their collaboration. The establishment of what would become known as the Old Workshop represented the formalization of Gehrman's role as developer and trainer of specialized personnel for otherworldly threat response. The church provided resources and institutional support, while Gehrman contributed expertise and methodology that no academic institution could have developed through purely theoretical research. The workshop became a place where the practical requirements of surviving contact with cosmic horrors were studied and codified into teachable techniques. In those early days of the workshop, Gehrman worked with volunteers who understood that they were participating in the development of entirely new approaches to human defense against inhuman threats. These first students were not the blood-enhanced warriors that hunters would later become, but ordinary men and women whose courage and dedication compensated for their lack of supernatural capabilities. They trusted Gehrman's judgment and followed his guidance even when his instructions seemed to contradict everything they had learned about combat and survival. The training methods developed in the old workshop emphasized psychological preparation as much as physical conditioning. Gehrman understood that the greatest danger facing hunters was not physical injury, but mental breakdown caused by exposure to phenomena that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. His students learned meditation techniques designed to maintain cognitive flexibility when confronted with impossible situations. They practiced exercises that would preserve personal identity when interacting with entities whose very existence threatened the coherence of human consciousness. But perhaps most importantly, they learned to accept the inevitability of their own transformation through prolonged exposure to otherworldly influences. Gehrman taught them that the hunter's path was not a career that one could practice and then retire from to return to normal life. Contact with cosmic forces created permanent changes in human psychology and perception that could never be completely reversed. The best that hunters could hope for was to retain enough of their essential humanity to remember why their sacrifice was necessary and worthwhile. The weapons created in the old workshop during this period represented the pinnacle of human craftsmanship, enhanced by insights gained through direct contact with otherworldly phenomena. Each piece was individually crafted to match the specific needs and capabilities of its intended wielder. The trick weapon concept that would later become standard throughout the hunter organization emerged from Gehrman's recognition that versatility was essential when facing opponents whose capabilities could not be predicted in advance. But the true innovation of the old workshop was not technological but philosophical. Gehrman created a new understanding of what it meant to be human in a universe where humanity was not the dominant or most significant form of consciousness. His hunters learned to see themselves not as masters of their environment, but as guardians of something precious and fragile that required constant protection from forces that were indifferent to its value. This humble recognition of humanity's cosmic position would prove crucial in preparing them for the challenges that lay ahead. As word of the workshop's success spread throughout the region, Gehrman found himself training individuals who would go on to establish similar institutions in other areas affected by otherworldly threats. His methodology was adapted and modified to address local conditions and specific types of phenomena, but the core principles he had developed remained constant: speed over strength, precision over power, adaptability over doctrine, and always the recognition that the price of protecting humanity was the gradual surrender of one's own humanity to forces that existed beyond the boundaries of normal human experience. The success of these early years would later seem almost innocent when compared to the cosmic horror that would eventually consume Gehrman and transform the hunter organization into something that Gehrman could never have intended. But in those beginning days when the threats were comprehensible and the solutions were achievable, there was hope that human ingenuity and determination could provide adequate protection against whatever emerged from the ancient ruins beneath their feet. It was a hope that Gehrman would carry with him long after events had proven it to be tragically naive. The years that followed the establishment of the old workshop marked a period of unprecedented innovation in the art of otherworldly combat, as Gehrman's reputation drew seekers from across the known world to study under his guidance. The workshop itself evolved from a simple forge and training ground into something resembling a small academy where the accumulated knowledge of hunter methodology was preserved and transmitted to each new generation of students. Yet beneath the surface of this apparent success darker currents were already beginning to flow, as the very act of studying cosmic threats inevitably brought those threats closer to human understanding. Gehrman's approach to weapon design during this period represented a fundamental departure from traditional craftsmanship that had always prioritized either beauty or brute effectiveness over the subtle requirements of otherworldly combat. The trick weapons that emerged from his forge possessed a mechanical complexity that bordered on the supernatural, incorporating transformation mechanisms that seemed to violate basic principles of engineering and metallurgy. Each weapon was both tool and puzzle, requiring its wielder to master not only conventional combat techniques, but also the precise timing and spatial awareness necessary to utilize the weapon's multiple configurations effectively. The saw cleaver that would later become the iconic symbol of the hunter organization exemplified Gehrman's understanding, and that versatility was not merely advantageous but absolutely essential when facing opponents whose capabilities could not be predicted through normal analytical methods. In its compact form, the weapon served as a brutal close-quarters implement capable of penetrating the thick hides and dense bone structures that characterized many otherworldly entities. When extended, it became a reach weapon that could engage multiple opponents while maintaining safe distance from creatures whose touch might carry corrupting influences. But the true genius of the saw cleaver lay not in its mechanical properties, but in its psychological effect on both wielder and opponent. The transformation process itself served as a form of intimidation that could momentarily disorient creatures unaccustomed to witnessing rapid changes in their environment. For the hunter, the act of transformation became a ritualistic moment that reinforced their separation from ordinary humanity and their commitment to methods that transcended normal human limitations. The weapon became an extension not just of the hunter's physical capabilities, but of their evolving identity as something between human and other. The hunter axe represented Gehrman's recognition that some otherworldly threats required responses that prioritized raw destructive power over finesse and precision. The weapon's extended form could generate enough force to shatter stone and metal, while its compact configuration provided the mobility necessary for rapid repositioning during extended engagements. The psychological profile of hunters who gravitated toward the axe tended toward individuals who possessed the mental fortitude necessary to engage in direct confrontation with creatures that radiated existential dread. Perhaps most innovative of all was the threaded cane, a weapon that appeared to casual observation as nothing more than a gentleman's walking stick, but could transform into a barbed whip capable of controlling battlefield dynamics through area denial and opponent manipulation. The cane attracted hunters whose approach to otherworldly threats emphasized intelligence and tactical thinking over direct physical confrontation. These individuals often proved most effective in situations requiring investigation and problem-solving rather than pure combat prowess. The training regimens developed in the old workshop during this period reflected Gehrman's growing understanding that hunting otherworldly threats required capabilities that went far beyond conventional military preparation. Physical conditioning remained important, but was subordinated to psychological training, designed to preserve cognitive function when exposed to phenomena that challenged basic assumptions about reality. Students learned to maintain situational awareness while experiencing sensory distortions that would incapacitate unprepared individuals. The meditation techniques that Gehrman incorporated into hunter training drew from sources that predated any organized religious tradition, accessing forms of mental discipline that seemed to have been developed specifically for maintaining psychological stability during encounters with cosmic forces. These practices required years to master completely, but provided immediate benefits to students who applied them consistently. Hunters who had undergone this training could function effectively in environments where the normal laws of physics appeared to operate according to modified parameters. The philosophical education provided to workshop students proved equally important as their physical and mental conditioning. Gehrman taught them to understand their role, not as warriors fighting for victory, but as guardians, maintaining a barrier between human civilization and forces that were fundamentally hostile to human existence. This perspective helped hunters maintain motivation during prolonged periods of isolation and exposure to experiences that would drive ordinary individuals to despair or madness. The relationship between hunter and mentor that developed within the workshop structure was unlike anything that existed in conventional educational institutions. Gehrman served not merely as instructor but as psychological anchor for students who were undergoing transformations that threatened their connection to normal human experience. His presence provided continuity and stability during periods when everything else in a student's life was changing in ways that could not be controlled or predicted. The weapons crafted for individual students reflected Gehrman's ability to perceive psychological and physical characteristics that the students themselves might not yet recognize. A blade created for a particular hunter would prove perfectly suited to their eventual fighting style and temperament, even though those qualities might not manifest until years after the weapon's completion. This seemingly prophetic insight suggested that Gehrman's understanding of human nature had been enhanced through his exposure to otherworldly influences in ways that he himself might not fully comprehend. The most promising students who emerged from the old workshop during this period would later become legendary figures in their own right, though their stories would ultimately be marked by the same tragic elements that would define Gehrman's own fate. These individuals possessed combinations of skill, courage, and psychological resilience that made them invaluable for protecting human interests, but also made them inevitably attractive to cosmic forces seeking agents capable of operating effectively in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Lady Maria emerged as perhaps the most gifted student ever to train under Gehrman's guidance, mundane, combining aristocratic bearing with combat capabilities that surpassed even veteran hunters with decades of experience. Her mastery of both traditional swordplay and the unique techniques required for otherworldly combat made her an ideal candidate for the most dangerous missions that the workshop undertook. But her sensitivity to the moral implications of hunter work would eventually prove to be both her greatest strength and her ultimate weakness. The Hunter of Hunters, who would later be known only by his cryptic title, demonstrated an approach to the profession that emphasized precision and stealth over direct confrontation. His ability to track and eliminate rogue hunters who had succumbed to blood drunkenness or cosmic corruption made him invaluable to workshop operations, but also isolated him from normal human relationships in ways that would prove psychologically devastating over time. The foreign hunter, whose origins remained mysterious even to Gehrman himself, brought techniques and perspectives that had been developed in response to otherworldly threats that differed significantly from those encountered in the Gehrman region. His presence in the workshop suggested that the cosmic forces affecting human civilization operated on a global scale, and that hunters working in isolation might be fighting different aspects of the same fundamental threat. The bond that developed between Gehrman and his most accomplished students transcended normal teacher-student relationships, evolving into something that resembled family connections, based on shared experiences that no one outside the hunter community could understand or appreciate. These relationships provided emotional support that helped maintain psychological stability during periods of extreme stress, but also created vulnerabilities that cosmic forces would eventually learn to exploit. The techniques for psychological preparation that Gehrman developed during this period represented perhaps his most important contribution to human survival against otherworldly threats. Students learned to maintain personal identity while acknowledging that prolonged exposure to cosmic influences would inevitably change fundamental aspects of their personality and perception. This paradoxical acceptance of change, while preserving essential self-characteristics, required mental flexibility that bordered on the supernatural. The workshop's reputation during these years attracted attention from scholarly institutions throughout the region as researchers recognized that Gehrman's practical knowledge could complement their theoretical understanding of otherworldly phenomena. The collaboration between workshop hunters and academic investigators produced insights that neither group could have achieved independently. Though these partnerships also introduced new forms of risk, as academic curiosity sometimes conflicted with hunter pragmatism, regarding which knowledge was safe to pursue. The weapons and techniques developed during the workshop's golden age would eventually be studied and copied by other organizations attempting to create their own hunter forces, but none of these imitations achieved the effectiveness of Gehrman's original methodology. The difference lay not in any technical secrets, but in the philosophical foundation that guided workshop operations and the personal charisma that allowed Gehrman to inspire students to transcend their apparent limitations. As the years passed, and the threats emerging from the ancient ruins grew more numerous and sophisticated, Gehrman began to recognize that the workshop's current capabilities might not be sufficient to address the challenges that lay ahead. The cosmic forces that had created the Pthumerian civilization possessed resources and knowledge that human understanding could barely comprehend. If humanity was to survive contact with such entities, it would require enhancements that went beyond conventional training and preparation. The decision to explore blood-based enhancement would mark the end of the workshop's innocent period and the beginning of a transformation that would ultimately consume everything that Gehrman had worked to protect. But in these final years before that fateful choice, the old workshop represented humanity's best hope for maintaining independence in a universe where cosmic forces were beginning to take direct interest in human affairs. The hunters who emerged from Gehrman's training would face challenges that would test not only their combat abilities, but their fundamental humanity as they struggled to preserve what they valued most about human civilization, while employing methods that threatened to destroy everything that made such preservation worthwhile. In the annals of hunter history, no relationship would prove more significant or more tragic than the bond that developed between Gehrman and the aristocratic student who would become his greatest achievement and his most profound regret. Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower arrived at the old workshop bearing credentials that spoke of noble lineage and conventional education. But her true qualifications lay in qualities that could not be taught through normal instruction. She possessed an intuitive understanding of combat dynamics that complemented Gehrman's methodical approach to otherworldly threats, while maintaining a moral clarity that would ultimately set her apart from her peers in ways both admirable and devastating. The circumstances of Maria's arrival at the workshop reflected the growing recognition among educated society that otherworldly threats could not be addressed through conventional military responses or academic study alone. Her family had connections to both the scholarly community at Bergenworth and the emerging power structure of the Healing Church, placing her in a unique position to understand the political and intellectual currents that were shaping humanity's response to cosmic influences. Her decision to pursue hunter training represented not personal adventure-seeking, but a calculated assessment of where her capabilities could be most effectively employed in service of human survival. From the beginning of her training, Maria demonstrated aptitudes that exceeded even Gehrman's high expectations for students of aristocratic background. Her mastery of the recuyo, a paired weapon system that required perfect coordination between both hands and absolute spatial awareness, developed with a speed that suggested natural talent enhanced by years of disciplined practice. The weapon itself became an extension of her aristocratic bearing, transforming the brutal necessities of hunter combat into something that resembled a deadly form of dance. The relationship that developed between mentor and student transcended the normal boundaries of educational instruction, evolving into something that combined professional respect with deep personal affection and mutual understanding. Gehrman recognized in Maria qualities that he had always hoped to cultivate in his students, while Maria found in her teacher a wisdom and dedication that validated her choice to abandon conventional aristocratic expectations in favor of the hunter's path. Their collaboration in developing new techniques and approaches to otherworldly combat produced innovations that advanced the entire field of hunter methodology. The technique of blood manipulation that would become Maria's signature capability emerged from her aristocratic background in ways that neither teacher nor student, the noble bloodlines of her family, had been exposed to otherworldly influences for generations through their involvement in esoteric research and occult practices, creating subtle alterations in their physiological and psychological makeup that manifested as enhanced capabilities under appropriate conditions. Maria's ability to weaponize her own blood represented not learned skill but awakened potential that had been dormant until activated by hunter training. The moral framework that guided Maria's approach to hunter work reflected her aristocratic upbringing, but also demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of the ethical complexities involved in protecting humanity through methods that required the gradual abandonment of human limitations. She maintained clear distinctions between necessary violence and gratuitous cruelty, while recognizing that such distinctions might not always be apparent to observers unfamiliar with the specific requirements of otherworldly combat. Her example provided other hunters with a model for maintaining personal integrity while engaging in activities that conventional morality could not adequately address. The partnership between Gehrman and Maria during the workshop's most productive years produced some of the most effective hunter techniques ever developed, as their complementary skills and perspectives generated innovations that neither could have achieved independently. Maria's aristocratic education provided theoretical knowledge that enhanced Gehrman's practical experience, while his understanding of cosmic threats gave context to her academic learning that transformed abstract concepts into operational capabilities. Their collaboration represented the ideal fusion of knowledge and wisdom that the hunter profession required to address challenges that were both intellectual and existential in nature. The missions that Gehrman and Maria undertook together during this period established patterns of cooperation and mutual support that would influence hunter doctrine for generations, even after the tragic circumstances that would end their partnership. Their complementary fighting styles allowed them to address threats that would have overwhelmed individual hunters, while their shared understanding of hunter philosophy ensured that their methods remained focused on protection rather than conquest or domination. The reputation they established working together attracted the attention of institutions throughout the region, seeking solutions to otherworldly problems that conventional authorities could not handle. The request from the Healing Church to investigate strange reports from a remote coastal settlement initially appeared to be another routine assignment that would allow the workshop to demonstrate its capabilities while advancing the cause of human protection against cosmic threats. The Fishing Hamlet had experienced contact with otherworldly entities that seemed benevolent rather than hostile, creating an opportunity to study positive human-cosmic interaction under natural conditions rather than the controlled circumstances that characterized most church research. The potential knowledge to be gained from such investigation seemed to outweigh any risks that might be involved. The journey to the Fishing Hamlet revealed aspects of the coastal region that had been hidden from inland populations for generations, as the isolated communities that subsisted on maritime resources had developed cultural practices and belief systems that incorporated otherworldly influences in ways that seemed to enhance rather than threaten their way of life. The inhabitants had achieved a form of symbiotic relationship with cosmic entities that challenged prevailing assumptions about the inevitably destructive nature of human exposure to such forces. Their existence suggested possibilities that neither the church nor the workshop had previously considered. The great one known as Koz, whose presence had transformed the Fishing Hamlet from ordinary coastal settlement into something approaching a terrestrial paradise, represented a form of cosmic entity whose motivations and capabilities differed fundamentally from the hostile or indifferent beings that hunters typically encountered. Either creature's apparent willingness to share its knowledge and power with human populations without demanding the complete surrender of human nature suggested that positive relationships between species might be possible under appropriate circumstances. The potential implications for human cosmic relations were profound enough to justify the most careful and respectful investigation. The initial contact between the hunter expedition and the Fishing Hamlet population proceeded according to protocols that emphasized diplomatic engagement rather than threat assessment, as the situation clearly fell outside normal hunter operational parameters. The villagers demonstrated no signs of the psychological distortion or physical corruption that typically accompanied otherworldly contact, while their enhanced capabilities seemed to represent genuine improvements to human potential, rather than alien replacement of human characteristics. Maria's aristocratic background proved valuable in establishing communication with community leaders who appreciated formal courtesy and respectful recognition of their achievements. The research conducted during the early phases of the expedition produced insights that advanced human understanding of cosmic entities and their potential relationships with terrestrial life in ways that seemed to validate the most optimistic projections of church philosophers and Burgenworth scholars. The symbiotic bond between Coase and the Fishing Hamlet inhabitants demonstrated that cosmic consciousness could enhance human capabilities without destroying human identity, while the peaceful coexistence of enhanced and normal individuals within the community suggested that such relationships need not threaten social stability or cultural continuity. The children born within the hamlet during the period of Coase's presence displayed characteristics that represented genuine evolutionary advancement rather than alien contamination, as their enhanced sensory capabilities and expanded awareness seemed to build upon rather than replace normal human faculties. These young people served as living proof that human cosmic integration was not only possible, but could produce results that exceeded the capabilities of either species operating independently. Their existence offered hope that humanity's future might involve cooperation with cosmic entities rather than perpetual conflict or fearful isolation. The transformation of the expedition from research mission to military operation occurred with a suddenness that caught both hunters and villagers unprepared for the violence that would follow as church authorities made decisions based on institutional priorities that had never been communicated to the field teams conducting the investigation. The orders that arrived from church headquarters reflected concerns about maintaining control over otherworldly research and preventing the development of alternative approaches to cosmic contact that might challenge church authority over such matters. The welfare of the Fishing Hamlet population was treated as secondary to broader institutional considerations. The moral crisis that confronted Maria during the transition from diplomatic mission to violent suppression challenged every principle that had guided her decision to become a hunter, and her understanding of what hunter work was meant to accomplish. The villagers who had welcomed the expedition as fellow seekers of cosmic wisdom found themselves classified as threats to be eliminated, while their children, who represented humanity's potential for peaceful evolution, became targets for specimen collection and biological research. The complete reversal of mission parameters left no room for principled compromise or graduated response. The methods employed during the Hamlet operation violated every ethical standard that the workshop had developed for hunter conduct, as the expedition abandoned its original research objectives in favor of systematic extraction of biological materials and elimination of witnesses who might reveal church activities to outside observers, and the collection of eyes from living subjects represented a form of brutality that reduced human beings to sources of useful components, while the deliberate targeting of children demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice innocent life for institutional benefit that destroyed any pretense of moral justification. Maria's participation in activities that contradicted her fundamental beliefs about hunter responsibility and human dignity created psychological trauma that no amount of training or preparation could have prevented, as the gap between her actions and her values became too wide to bridge through rationalization or institutional loyalty. The recognition that she had contributed to the destruction of everything that the hamlet represented, while serving institutions that she had trusted to protect human welfare, shattered her confidence in her own judgment and the legitimacy of the hunter profession itself. The death of Coase during the Hamlet operation eliminated not only a unique cosmic entity, but also the possibility of learning from an example of successful human cosmic cooperation that might have provided alternatives to the destructive approaches that dominated church research. The creature's destruction represented a loss that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation, affecting the long-term prospects for human development and cosmic relations in ways that could not be calculated or compensated. The expedition had eliminated the very phenomenon that had made it valuable to study. The aftermath of the Fishing Hamlet massacre would haunt Maria for the remainder of her life, as she struggled to reconcile her participation in unconscionable acts with her continued commitment to protecting humanity from otherworldly threats. Her withdrawal from active hunter operations reflected not cowardice or loss of capability, but recognition that her psychological state had been compromised in ways that made her unsuitable for responsibilities that required clear moral judgment and reliable decision-making under extreme pressure. Her retreat to the astral clock tower represented an attempt to preserve what remained of her integrity while preventing further damage to causes she still believed in, despite her personal failures. The weapons that Maria abandoned following the Hamlet operation would later be discovered by hunters who could not understand why tools of such exceptional quality had been discarded by their original owner. The recuyo and other items associated with her legacy carried histories that were both inspiring and cautionary, as they represented capabilities that had been achieved through dedication and sacrifice, but had ultimately proven insufficient to prevent moral catastrophe when institutional pressures overwhelmed personal convictions. The gap between individual virtue and systemic corruption had consumed even the most exemplary practitioners of the hunter profession. For Gehrman, the loss of his most accomplished student to psychological breakdown and eventual suicide represented a personal failure that challenged his understanding of what hunter training could accomplish and what responsibilities mentors bore for the ultimate fate of those they guided. Maria's tragedy demonstrated that even perfect technical preparation and strong moral foundations might not provide adequate protection against the corrupting influences that surrounded hunter work. When institutional contexts shifted toward approaches that contradicted fundamental human values, the recognition that he had been unable to protect her from such corruption would influence every subsequent decision he made about hunter training and methodology. The introduction of old blood into hunter training protocols marked a fundamental transformation in both the capabilities and the nature of the profession that Gehrman had devoted his life to developing. What began as careful experimentation, designed to provide hunters with advantages necessary for survival against increasingly dangerous otherworldly threats, gradually evolved into systematic enhancement programs that would forever alter the relationship between human consciousness and cosmic forces. The changes that followed were neither sudden nor immediately apparent as catastrophic, but they represented a crossing of thresholds that could never be uncrossed once the initial steps had been taken. The collaboration between the old workshop and the healing church in developing blood enhancement techniques reflected the convergence of practical necessity and theoretical opportunity that characterized much of Gehrman's approach to otherworldly phenomena during this period. Church researchers possessed access to old blood supplies and the theoretical knowledge necessary to understand its properties, while workshop personnel provided the practical experience required to assess how such substances might affect individuals engaged in high-stress combat situations. The partnership seemed to offer benefits to both institutions while advancing the broader cause of human protection against cosmic threats. The initial trials of blood enhancement were conducted with volunteers drawn from among the workshop's most experienced hunters, who understood the experimental nature of the procedures and accepted the risks involved in pursuit of capabilities that might prove essential for protecting human civilization. These early subjects underwent careful monitoring, designed to detect adverse effects before they could become dangerous, while documenting beneficial changes that might justify broader implementation of enhancement protocols. The methodical approach reflected Gehrman's insistence that hunter safety remain the primary consideration, even when pursuing innovations that offered significant operational advantages. The physical improvements produced by blood enhancement exceeded even the most optimistic projections of church researchers and workshop personnel, as subjects displayed strength, speed, and endurance capabilities that bordered on the superhuman while maintaining the coordination and tactical thinking that distinguished skilled hunters from mere combatants. Enhanced hunters could wield weapons that would have been impossible for normal humans to use effectively, while moving with speed that made them difficult for opponents to track or anticipate. Their healing capabilities allowed them to recover from injuries that would have incapacitated or killed unenhanced individuals within time frames that seemed to violate basic biological principles. The psychological effects of blood enhancement proved more complex and subtle than the physical changes, though they were ultimately far more significant in determining the long-term consequences of the enhancement program. Enhanced hunters reported improvements in sensory perception and situational awareness that made them more effective at detecting and responding to otherworldly threats, while their enhanced physical capabilities provided confidence that improved their performance in dangerous situations. These benefits seemed to validate the decision to pursue blood enhancement, despite the theoretical risks that church doctrine acknowledged, but considered manageable through proper preparation and supervision. However, the enhanced capabilities that blood treatment provided came accompanied by psychological changes that were initially dismissed as minor side effects, but would prove to have cumulative consequences that fundamentally altered the nature of hunter consciousness and motivation. Enhanced hunters began to experience reality in ways that differed subtly but significantly from normal human perception, as their increased sensitivity to otherworldly influences provided access to information and experiences that were not available to unenhanced individuals. These expanded perceptual capabilities created a form of psychological isolation that separated enhanced hunters from the very population they had dedicated their lives to protecting. The blood enhancement protocols developed during this period required careful calibration to achieve beneficial effects without triggering the transformation processes that could convert human subjects into the very threats that hunters were trained to eliminate. The dosages and preparation methods used in workshop enhancement differed significantly from the medical applications that church physicians employed for treating disease and injury, reflecting the recognition that combat enhancement required different considerations than therapeutic healing. The workshop protocols emphasized maintaining psychological stability and tactical effectiveness while accepting higher levels of physical risk than would have been acceptable in medical contexts. Gehrman's personal participation in blood enhancement represented both his commitment to sharing the risks that he asked his students to accept and his recognition that leadership in an enhanced hunter organization would require capabilities that matched or exceeded those of the individuals under his guidance. His transformation through blood treatment provided him with insights into the psychological and physiological changes that enhancement produced, while demonstrating to his students that he remained willing to undergo any procedure that he recommended for their consideration. The example of personal commitment helped maintain morale and unit cohesion during periods when the long-term consequences of enhancement remained uncertain. The weapons and techniques developed for enhanced hunters required modifications to accommodate their increased capabilities, while ensuring that the fundamental principles of hunter methodology remained applicable to individuals whose physical and psychological characteristics had been altered through blood treatment. Enhanced hunters could employ fighting styles that would have been impossible for normal humans, while their increased speed and strength allowed them to use heavier and more complex weapons without sacrificing the mobility that hunter tactics required. The integration of enhancement with traditional hunter training produced combat capabilities that exceeded anything that previous generations had achieved. The training protocols that evolved to accommodate blood-enhanced hunters reflected the recognition that traditional psychological preparation methods might not be sufficient for individuals whose consciousness had been altered through contact with otherworldly substances. Hinder scene, affect, is, rat. Enhanced hunters required instruction in managing perceptual experiences that had no precedent in normal human psychology, while learning to maintain emotional and ethical stability, despite exposure to influences that could gradually erode conventional moral frameworks. The challenge of preserving human values while accepting inhuman capabilities became central to workshop educational philosophy. The selection criteria for blood enhancement candidates emphasized not only physical capability and psychological resilience, but also strong personal connections to human community and clear understanding of why hunter work served human interests rather than serving the enhancement process itself. Gehrman recognized that individuals who lacked firm grounding in human relationships and values would be more susceptible to the isolating effects of enhancement that could gradually separate them from the population they were meant to protect. The screening process was designed to identify candidates whose enhancement would strengthen rather than weaken their commitment to human welfare. The enhanced hunters who emerged from the workshop during this period represented a new category of human being, whose capabilities and psychological characteristics had been permanently altered through deliberate contact with cosmic forces under controlled conditions. These individuals retained their essential humanity and their commitment to protecting human civilization, but they also possessed experiences and abilities that set them apart from normal human society, in ways that created both opportunities and dangers for the broader community. Their existence raised fundamental questions about the boundaries of human identity and the acceptable costs of survival against otherworldly threats. The combat effectiveness of enhanced hunters against otherworldly opponents validated the decision to pursue blood enhancement, despite the psychological and social costs that the program imposed on participants and their communities. Enhanced hunters could engage threats that would have overwhelmed even the most skilled unenhanced fighters while operating in environments where normal humans could not survive for extended periods. Their capabilities provided humanity with tools that seemed essential for long-term survival in a universe where cosmic entities possessed resources and knowledge that far exceeded human understanding. However, the success of blood-enhanced hunters in combat situations created dependency relationships that gradually shifted the balance of power within human institutions toward individuals whose psychological characteristics had been altered through otherworldly contact. Enhanced hunters became increasingly important to the organizations that employed them, while their unique capabilities made them difficult to replace or control through conventional administrative methods. The concentration of power among enhanced individuals created governance challenges that human political structures had never been designed to address. The bonds that developed between enhanced hunters reflected their shared experiences of transformation and their mutual understanding of psychological states that normal humans could not comprehend or appreciate. These relationships provided emotional support that helped maintain stability among individuals whose enhancement had isolated them from conventional social networks, while creating new forms of community based on capabilities and experiences rather than traditional kinship or geographic proximity. The enhanced hunter community became a separate society within human civilization, with its own values, priorities, and loyalty structures. The gradual development of what would later be termed blood drunkenness among long-term enhanced hunters represented the emergence of psychological changes that went beyond the intended effects of enhancement programs to encompass alterations in fundamental motivation and judgment that threatened the original purposes for which enhancement had been pursued. Blood-drunk hunters retained their combat capabilities and their loyalty to the hunter organization, but their understanding of appropriate methods and acceptable costs gradually shifted in directions that brought them into conflict with the human values they had originally served. The early signs of blood drunkenness were subtle enough that they were initially attributed to normal variations in personality and behavior that could be expected among individuals engaged in dangerous and stressful work over extended periods. Enhanced hunters showed increased aggression and reduced empathy, but these changes seemed to improve their effectiveness in combat situations, while their enhanced capabilities provided them with confidence that appeared to be justified by their operational success. The gradual nature of the changes made them difficult to detect until they had progressed to levels that created significant operational and ethical problems. Gehrman's recognition that blood enhancement was producing psychological effects that might ultimately threaten the human values that hunter work was meant to protect created a crisis of conscience that would influence every subsequent decision he made about workshop operations and hunter training. The realization that the tools necessary for protecting humanity might inevitably corrupt those who used them posed fundamental questions about the sustainability of human resistance to cosmic threats and the acceptable limits of transformation in service of survival. The price of effectiveness was becoming higher than anyone had anticipated when enhancement programs were first developed. The attempts to develop safeguards and countermeasures for blood drunkenness reflected the workshop's commitment to preserving the humanity of enhanced hunters while maintaining their effectiveness against otherworldly threats. But these efforts were hampered by limited understanding of the mechanisms through which blood enhancement affected human consciousness, and the difficulty of reversing changes that seemed to be cumulative and progressive rather than temporary and controllable. The complexity of the enhancement process made it difficult to isolate specific factors that contributed to problematic psychological changes. As blood enhancement became more widespread throughout the hunter organization and began to influence individuals who had not undergone the careful selection and preparation that characterized workshop protocols, the frequency and severity of blood drunkenness incidents increased to levels that threatened the operational effectiveness and moral legitimacy of hunter institutions. The enhancement that had been developed to strengthen human resistance to cosmic threats was beginning to create new categories of threat that required the same levels of vigilance and protective response that had originally motivated the development of hunter capabilities. In the deepest hours of night, when the boundaries between dimensions grow thin and the cosmic forces that govern reality become visible to those whose perception has been sufficiently altered, here came a visitation that would transform not only Gehrman's existence, but the fundamental nature of what it meant to be human in a universe where otherworldly entities possessed the power to reshape consciousness itself. The moon presence emerged from realms beyond human comprehension to offer a bargain that seemed to promise salvation, but would prove to be the most exquisite form of damnation ever conceived by cosmic intelligence. The circumstances that attracted the moon presence's attention to Gehrman reflected the unique position he had achieved as the most skilled and dedicated hunter ever to master the arts of otherworldly combat, while maintaining sufficient humanity to serve as an effective intermediary between cosmic and terrestrial realms. His decades of experience in fighting threats that transcended normal physical laws had prepared his consciousness for contact with entities whose existence operated according to principles that would drive unprepared minds to immediate madness. His proven ability to train others in methods that preserved sanity during exposure to cosmic influences made him valuable as a potential agent for entities seeking to influence human development. The moon presence's approach to human contact differed fundamentally from the methods employed by other cosmic entities hunters had encountered, as it possessed sophisticated understanding of human psychology and motivation that allowed it to present proposals in terms that seemed consistent with human values and objectives, or rather than attempting to overwhelm or dominate human consciousness through displays of incomprehensible power. The entity crafted its offer to appear as a solution to problems that Gehrman had dedicated his life to solving. The cosmic intelligence recognized that cooperation would prove more effective than coercion for achieving its long-term objectives. The crisis that provided context for the moon presence's intervention was the accelerating breakdown of human institutions and the increasing frequency of otherworldly threats that exceeded the capacity of even enhanced hunters to address through conventional methods. The blood enhancement programs that had initially provided hunters with advantages necessary for protecting human civilization were beginning to produce side effects that threatened to transform the protectors into new categories of threat requiring protection against. The psychological corruption that accompanied blood drunkenness was spreading throughout hunter organizations, while the cosmic influences that affected enhanced individuals were gradually separating them from the human communities they had originally served. The moon presence's proposal offered a solution that seemed to address every aspect of the emerging crisis while preserving the essential elements that made hunter work valuable for protecting human welfare. The entity described a realm where hunters could be trained and equipped without the psychological corruption that characterized blood enhancement, while maintaining access to capabilities that would allow them to address threats that were beyond the reach of terrestrial methods. The hunter's dream would serve as both sanctuary and training ground, where the best aspects of hunter methodology could be preserved and developed without the constraints and corruptions that limited terrestrial operations. The price that the moon presence demanded for creating and maintaining this otherworldly training ground appeared reasonable when presented in the context of the benefits that would be provided and the magnitude of the crisis that required intervention. Gehrman would serve as guide and instructor for hunters who were brought to the dream, while using his expertise to ensure that they received the preparation necessary for addressing cosmic threats effectively. His role would be essentially identical to the work he had already been performing at the old workshop, but enhanced through access to resources and knowledge that no terrestrial institution could provide. The entity's description of the arrangement emphasized the voluntary nature of hunter participation in dream activities and the temporary character of their commitment to otherworldly service, as hunters would be free to return to normal human existence once they had completed their training and achieved their objectives. The moon presence presented the dream as a form of advanced education that would prepare exceptional individuals for leadership roles in protecting human civilization, while preserving their essential humanity through careful management of their exposure to cosmic influences. The program seemed to offer everything that terrestrial hunter training had attempted to achieve, but with greater effectiveness and fewer risks. Gehrman's decision to accept the moon presence's offer reflected both his desperation regarding the deteriorating situation of human hunter organizations and his confidence in his ability to maintain ethical standards and human values, even while working within otherworldly contexts. His decades of experience in preserving hunter humanity during exposure to cosmic influences suggested that he possessed the psychological resources necessary to serve effectively as an intermediary while protecting the interests of individuals who would be placed under his guidance. The opportunity to continue his life's work under conditions that seemed to eliminate the most serious risks and limitations of terrestrial operations appeared to justify accepting the unusual nature of the arrangement. The creation of the hunter's dream required Gehrman to undergo transformations that went far beyond anything that blood enhancement had previously demanded, as his consciousness was expanded to encompass multiple dimensional states, while his physical existence was anchored to an otherworldly realm that operated according to principles that differed fundamentally from terrestrial physics. The process was both exhilarating and terrifying, as he gained access to knowledge and capabilities that exceeded human limitations, while losing aspects of normal human existence that he had never previously considered essential to his identity. The dream itself manifested as a realm that combined elements drawn from Gehrman's memories of the old workshop, with architectural and environmental features that reflected the moon presence's understanding of what would be most conducive to hunter training and psychological preparation. The workshop area provided familiar tools and workbenches where weapons could be crafted and maintained, while the garden offered peaceful spaces where hunters could recover from traumatic experiences and process the psychological challenges that accompanied otherworldly combat. The overall design created an environment that felt simultaneously comforting and otherworldly. The hunters who began arriving in the dream following its establishment represented individuals who had been selected by criteria that reflected both human need for protection and cosmic interest in particular types of consciousness and capability. These were not merely the most skilled fighters or the most psychologically resilient individuals, but people whose combination of characteristics made them suitable for roles that transcended conventional hunter responsibilities. Their training in the dream would prepare them not only for combat against otherworldly threats, but for leadership positions in human institutions that would require understanding of cosmic influences and their implications for human development. The training methods that Gehrman developed for dream operations incorporated the best aspects of old workshop methodology while taking advantage of the unique properties of an otherworldly environment. To achieve results that would have been impossible under terrestrial conditions, hunters could experience combat scenarios that replicated the most dangerous otherworldly encounters without risking permanent death or psychological damage. while their access to enhanced weapons and equipment allowed them to develop skills that prepared them for threats that exceeded anything they might encounter in normal human experience. The dream provided ideal conditions for preparing hunters to serve as guardians of human civilization against cosmic threats. However, the psychological effects of prolonged residence in the dream proved more complex and problematic than either Gehrman or the moon presence had initially anticipated, as hunters who spent extended periods in otherworldly environment began to experience forms of consciousness that differed fundamentally from normal human awareness. The enhanced perception and expanded capabilities that dream training provided came accompanied by psychological changes that gradually separated hunters from the human communities they were meant to protect, while their increasing familiarity with cosmic perspectives made it difficult for them to relate to ordinary human concerns and motivations. The doll, who served as Gehrman's companion and assistant in managing dream operations, represented the moon presence's attempt to provide him with emotional support that would help maintain his psychological stability during periods of isolation from normal human contact. Created in the likeness of Maria, the doll possessed memories and personality characteristics that allowed her to provide companionship while serving as a reminder of the human relationships that had given meaning to Gehrman's earlier existence. However, the artificial nature of her consciousness created a form of companionship that was simultaneously comforting and deeply melancholic, as it emphasized his separation from authentic human relationships. The realization that his acceptance of the moon presence's bargain had transformed him into something that was no longer entirely human, while binding him to responsibilities that would continue indefinitely rather than temporarily, created a form of existential crisis that challenged everything Gehrman had believed about the nature of his commitment and the value of the work he was performing. The voluntary arrangement that had seemed to offer enhanced capability to serve human interests had become a form of cosmic servitude that preserved his consciousness but eliminated his freedom to make fundamental choices about his own existence. The attempts to escape or modify the terms of his arrangement with the moon presence revealed the extent to which cosmic entities operated according to principles that made human concepts of contract and obligation essentially meaningless, as the entity's understanding of voluntary commitment differed fundamentally from human legal and ethical frameworks. The bargain that Gehrman had accepted in good faith, based on representations that seemed clear and reasonable, proved to involve implications and constraints that had not been disclosed during initial negotiations. It differed fine Titsegids during initial negotiations. The cosmic perspective on time and commitment made temporary arrangements essentially permanent, while the entity's concept of voluntary service included forms of compulsion that were incompatible with human understanding of free will. The recognition that he had become a prisoner rather than a partner in the arrangement with the moon presence created a profound sense of betrayal and despair that was compounded by his continued commitment to protecting the hunters who were brought under his guidance, and his understanding that his situation served important functions in maintaining barriers between human civilization and cosmic forces that could destroy everything he valued. The impossibility of escape was balanced by the genuine importance of the work he was performing and the recognition that abandoning his responsibilities would have consequences that extended far beyond his personal suffering. The psychological adaptation that allowed Gehrman to continue functioning effectively despite his cosmic imprisonment required him to develop forms of detachment and acceptance that preserved his essential humanity while acknowledging the futility of resistance against forces that operated on scales that made human concerns essentially irrelevant. His survival depended on finding meaning in the limited agency that remained available to him, while accepting the loss of everything that had previously defined his identity and given purpose to his existence. The transformation from free agent to cosmic prisoner required psychological resources that no human had ever been required to develop. The establishment of the hunter's dream as both training ground and prison created a form of otherworldly institution that served cosmic interests while providing genuine benefits to human civilization through the preparation of exceptionally capable hunters who could address threats that would otherwise overwhelm human defenses. The complex relationship between cosmic manipulation and human benefit that characterized dream operations made it impossible to classify the arrangement as simply beneficial or harmful, as it provided essential services while exacting costs that could not be adequately measured or compensated. The ambiguous nature of the relationship reflected the fundamental incompatibility between cosmic and human concepts of value and exchange. The realm that emerged from Gehrman's bargain with the moon presence represented a form of existence that defied every category that human language possessed. To describe it as the hunter's dream, existed simultaneously as sanctuary and prison, workshop and temple, training ground and tomb. Pause. Ow. The ethereal landscape that surrounded the central workshop area possessed qualities that seemed designed to comfort and inspire, while subtly reinforcing the otherworldly nature of the environment and the cosmic forces that governed its existence. Every element of the dream reflected the complex relationship between human need and alien intention that characterized the arrangement between Gehrman and his cosmic patron. The workshop itself served as the heart of dream operations, providing familiar tools and workbenches that allowed Gehrman to continue the weapon crafting and hunter training that had defined his terrestrial existence, while incorporating otherworldly materials and techniques that expanded his capabilities beyond anything that normal physics could have supported. The weapons created in the dream workshop possessed properties that transcended conventional metallurgy and engineering, as they were forged from materials that existed partially outside normal space and time, while incorporating knowledge that had been gained through cosmic contact rather than human experimentation and development. The garden areas that surrounded the workshop represented perhaps the most psychologically complex aspect of the dream environment, as they provided spaces of genuine beauty and tranquility that offered respite from the intensity of hunter training, while serving as constant reminders of the artificial nature of the entire realm. The flowers that bloomed in otherworldly soil possessed colors and fragrances that had no earthly equivalent, while their presence created an atmosphere of melancholic beauty that reflected Gehrman's emotional state more accurately than any verbal description could convey. The grave markers scattered throughout the garden served multiple functions within the dream's symbolic architecture, as they provided memorial spaces where hunters could honor fallen comrades, while offering Gehrman tangible reminders of the costs that hunter work exacted from those who chose to pursue it. The names carved into the weathered stones represented not only individual hunters who had died in service to human protection, but also aspects of Gehrman's own identity that had been sacrificed in his transformation from mortal craftsman to cosmic agent. The doll who moved through the dream environment with grace that seemed both human and otherworldly provided companionship that was simultaneously precious and heartbreaking, as her artificial consciousness could simulate the warmth and understanding that Gehrman had lost through his separation from authentic human relationships, while constantly reminding him of everything that could never be recovered or replaced. Her presence served as both comfort and torture, as she embodied the memory of connections that had given meaning to his earlier existence, while emphasizing the impossibility of recreating such relationships under his current circumstances. The relationship between Gehrman and the doll reflected the broader psychological dynamics that governed his existence in the dream, as their interactions provided emotional sustenance that helped maintain his sanity while reinforcing his awareness of the artificial nature of his current environment and the cosmic manipulation that shaped every aspect of his experience. The conversations they shared about hunters and their missions created a semblance of normal human discourse, while operating within parameters that were defined by otherworldly intelligence rather than authentic personal choice or emotional expression. The hunters who arrived in the dream brought with them fragments of the normal human world that provided Gehrman with connection to the terrestrial realm he had been forced to abandon, while presenting him with individuals whose psychological state and moral development became his responsibility, under circumstances that offered no clear guidance about how such responsibilities should be fulfilled. Each new hunter represented both opportunity and burden, as they required training and guidance that could prepare them for cosmic threats, while their eventual departure returned him to isolation that was made more painful by the brief taste of human companionship they had provided. The training methods that Gehrman employed in the dream incorporated techniques that had been developed during his terrestrial career, while taking advantage of the unique properties of an otherworldly environment to achieve results that would have been impossible under normal physical conditions. The training methods that Gehrman employed in the dream incorporated techniques that had been developed during his Toreta technique. Hunters could experience death and resurrection that allowed them to learn from fatal mistakes without permanent consequences, while their access to enhanced weapons and unlimited resources eliminated many of the practical constraints that had limited terrestrial training programs. The dream provided ideal conditions for developing hunter capabilities while creating psychological conditions that gradually separated trainees from normal human experience. The weapons available in the dream workshop represented the culmination of Gehrman's understanding of hunter needs and cosmic materials, as they incorporated otherworldly properties that enhanced their effectiveness against supernatural threats, while maintaining the fundamental design principles that made them suitable for human use. The hunter's arsenal that he maintained included not only perfected versions of weapons that had been developed during his terrestrial career, but also entirely new designs that took advantage of materials and techniques that were only available through cosmic contact. The blood echoes that served as currency within the dream economy reflected the transformation of human experience into otherworldly resource, as the spiritual essence that was generated through hunter activities could be converted into practical capabilities and equipment through processes that operated according to cosmic rather than terrestrial principles. The system created a form of economy based on suffering and struggle that provided hunters with incentives to engage in dangerous activities while reinforcing the otherworldly nature of their existence. The insight that hunters gained through exposure to cosmic truths created a form of currency that was even more valuable and dangerous than blood. Echoes, as increased awareness of otherworldly realities provided access to enhanced capabilities while gradually eroding the psychological foundations that had previously anchored hunter identity in human experience. The accumulation of insight represented both advancement and corruption, as hunters gained knowledge that was necessary for addressing cosmic threats while losing aspects of their humanity that could never be recovered or replaced. The nightmares that hunters experienced during their rest periods in the dream reflected both their traumatic experiences in otherworldly combat and the influence of cosmic forces that sought to reshape human consciousness according to alien priorities and perspectives. These dream experiences within the dream created recursive psychological states that blurred the boundaries between rest and activity, while exposing hunters to influences that gradually altered their fundamental understanding of reality and their place within cosmic hierarchies. The messages and guidance that Gehrman provided to hunters reflected his attempt to prepare them for challenges that exceeded normal human experience, while preserving their essential humanity and their commitment to protecting terrestrial civilization. The advice he offered was filtered through his own transformation and cosmic contact, while attempting to address the specific needs and capabilities of individuals whose psychological state and moral development varied significantly. The challenge of providing appropriate guidance under such circumstances required wisdom that no terrestrial experience could have developed. The weapons and items that hunters could purchase or upgrade in the dream workshop represented Gehrman's attempt to provide them with tools that would enhance their effectiveness, while reflecting his understanding of their individual characteristics and the specific challenges they would face in their hunter careers. Each piece of equipment was crafted with attention to both practical requirements and symbolic significance, as weapons served not only as combat tools, but as expressions of hunter identity and commitment. The ritual activities that marked hunter advancement within dream hierarchy reflected cosmic understanding of human psychology and motivation, as ceremonies provided recognition for achievement while reinforcing otherworldly values and priorities that gradually replaced terrestrial concerns and loyalties. The transformation of human accomplishment into cosmic currency created incentive structures that encouraged behavior that served alien interests while appearing to reward hunter development and capability. The seasonal changes that occurred within the dream environment reflected cosmic cycles that operated according to principles that transcended terrestrial astronomy, while creating atmospheric variations that influenced hunter mood and behavior in ways that served the moon presence's long-term objectives. The shifting qualities of light and weather within the dream served both aesthetic and psychological functions as they provided environmental diversity while reinforcing the artificial nature of the entire realm. The animals that inhabited the dream landscape provided companionship and sensory stimulation that helped maintain psychological health among hunters while serving as subjects for otherworldly experimentation that advanced cosmic understanding of terrestrial life forms. The messengers who carried items and communications throughout the dream operated according to principles that reflected cosmic rather than biological imperatives, while their presence created an atmosphere of benign otherworldliness that made the alien nature of the environment seem less threatening. The architectural features that defined the physical structure of the dream reflected cosmic understanding of human aesthetic preferences while incorporating otherworldly principles that created spatial relationships and environmental qualities that had no terrestrial equivalent. The buildings and pathways that connected different areas of the dream served both practical and symbolic functions as they provided necessary infrastructure while expressing cosmic concepts through architectural metaphor. The temporal dynamics that governed dream operations created conditions where time could be manipulated to serve training requirements while ensuring that hunters remained isolated from normal human experience for periods that exceeded their conscious awareness. The ability to extend or compress temporal experience allowed for training programs that would have required decades under terrestrial conditions, while the disconnection from normal chronology gradually weakened hunter connections to human community and terrestrial concerns. The psychological effects of prolonged residence in the dream created forms of consciousness that differed fundamentally from normal human awareness, as hunters developed capabilities and perspectives that enhanced their effectiveness against cosmic threats, while separating them from the human communities they were meant to protect. The transformation that dream experience produced was both necessary for hunter effectiveness and destructive to hunter humanity, creating a tragic contradiction that could not be resolved through any adjustment of training methods or environmental conditions. The recognition that the dream served cosmic interests, while providing genuine benefits to human civilization, created moral and practical dilemmas that had no clear solutions, as the realm's existence was essential for preparing hunters to address threats that could destroy human civilization, while the methods used to achieve such preparation involved forms of manipulation and coercion that violated fundamental human values. The impossible position that Gehrman occupied as both agent and victim of this system reflected the broader contradictions that characterized human relations with cosmic entities. The mechanism through which new hunters were drawn into the dream reflected a selection process that operated according to principles far more complex and subtle than simple recruitment or conscription. As the moon presence possessed understanding of human psychology and destiny that allowed it to identify individuals whose consciousness and capabilities made them suitable for cosmic service, while their personal circumstances provided motivation that could be channeled toward otherworldly objectives. The criteria that governed hunter selection transcended conventional measures of skill or courage to encompass qualities that could only be perceived through cosmic awareness of human potential and psychological development. The moment of transition that brought hunters into the dream typically occurred during periods of extreme crisis or transformation, when their normal connection to terrestrial reality had been disrupted through trauma loss or exposure to otherworldly influences that created openings in consciousness that cosmic entities could exploit for purposes of contact and recruitment. The blood transfusion that marked the beginning of hunter participation in dream activities served both practical and symbolic functions as it established physical connection to otherworldly forces while creating psychological bonds that would gradually strengthen over time. The initial experience of awakening in the dream created forms of disorientation and wonder that reflected the fundamental differences between otherworldly and terrestrial existence, while providing new hunters with immediate evidence of capabilities and resources that exceeded anything available through normal human institutions. The workshop tools and weapons that were immediately accessible to new arrivals suggested unlimited potential for development, while the presence of Gehrman as guide and instructor offered the promise of wisdom gained through experience that no terrestrial teacher could provide. The early missions that new hunters undertook in the dream were designed to provide them with confidence and capability, while gradually exposing them to otherworldly influences that would begin the process of psychological transformation that was necessary for effective cosmic service. The progression from simple tasks to complex challenges created a sense of natural development, while ensuring that hunters became invested in dream activities before they fully understood the implications of their participation or the long-term consequences of their commitment. The relationship that developed between individual hunters and Gehrman during their early training reflected both his genuine desire to provide effective guidance and his tragic awareness that such guidance was preparing them for experiences that would likely result in their corruption or destruction. His interactions with new hunters combined professional instruction with personal warmth, while maintaining emotional distance that protected him from the pain of repeated loss when hunters completed their training and returned to terrestrial reality or succumbed to the dangers that hunter work inevitably entailed. The weapons and equipment that hunters acquired during their dream residency reflected both their individual preferences and capabilities, while incorporating otherworldly properties that enhanced their effectiveness beyond anything that terrestrial craftsmanship could achieve. The process of weapon selection and customization created personal connections between hunters and their tools, while reinforcing their dependence on dream resources and their separation from normal human technological capabilities. The blood echoes that hunters accumulated through their activities created a form of currency that could be converted into enhanced capabilities and equipment, while serving as measurement of their progress toward objectives that were defined by cosmic rather than human priorities. The system encouraged hunters to engage in increasingly dangerous activities while providing tangible rewards that justified the risks they accepted in pursuit of advancement within an otherworldly hierarchy. The insight that hunters gained through exposure to cosmic truths created both opportunity and danger, as increased awareness provided access to enhanced capabilities while gradually eroding the psychological foundations that anchored their identity in human experience. The accumulation of insight represented a form of spiritual advancement that was simultaneously necessary for effective hunter work and destructive to hunter humanity, creating a tragic paradox that could not be resolved through any modification of training methods or objectives. The return of hunters to terrestrial reality after completing their dream training created a form of reverse culture shock, as individuals who had become accustomed to otherworldly capabilities and resources found themselves operating within the constraints and limitations that characterized normal, human existence. The knowledge and skills they had acquired in the dream remained available, but their application under terrestrial conditions required adaptations that were often psychologically and practically difficult to achieve. The influence that dream-trained hunters exercised within terrestrial hunter organizations reflected both their enhanced capabilities and their altered perspectives, as they brought cosmic knowledge and otherworldly techniques to institutions that were struggling to address threats that exceeded normal human understanding. Their presence provided essential leadership and expertise, while introducing philosophical and methodological approaches that challenged traditional hunter doctrine and practice. The psychological effects of repeated transitions between dream and terrestrial existence created forms of dissociation and identity, confusion that affected hunters who participated in multiple training cycles, while their increasing familiarity with otherworldly environment made normal human experience seem increasingly artificial and unsatisfying. The preference for dream existence that developed among experienced hunters reflected both the enhanced capabilities it provided and the psychological comfort of environment that was specifically designed to accommodate their altered consciousness. The bonds that developed between hunters who shared dream experiences created a form of community that transcended normal human social relationships, as individuals who had undergone cosmic transformation could understand and support each other in ways that were impossible for those who had not experienced similar alterations in consciousness and capability. These relationships provided emotional sustenance that helped maintain psychological stability while reinforcing separation from normal human community and terrestrial concerns. The knowledge that hunters carried between dream and terrestrial existence included not only practical skills and cosmic awareness, but also fragments of otherworldly truth that could influence human understanding of reality in ways that served cosmic interests while appearing to advance human knowledge and capability. The dissemination of such knowledge through hunter activities created subtle forms of cosmic influence within human institutions that gradually altered their priorities and methods in directions that aligned with otherworldly objectives. The selection of hunters for specific missions and assignments reflected cosmic understanding of individual capabilities and psychological characteristics, while serving broader strategic objectives that transcended the immediate requirements of particular situations. The deployment of hunters created patterns of intervention and influence that shaped human development according to cosmic priorities, while appearing to serve human interests in protection and advancement. The retirement or departure of hunters from dream service typically occurred when their psychological transformation had progressed to levels that made them unsuitable for continued cosmic service, or when their terrestrial responsibilities required their full attention and commitment. The process of leaving dream existence created forms of loss and disconnection that affected both departing hunters and those who remained, while the knowledge and capabilities they retained continued to influence terrestrial events in ways that served cosmic objectives. The tragic cycle that characterized hunter participation in dream activities reflected the fundamental incompatibility between cosmic objectives and human values, as individuals who were selected for their dedication to protecting human civilization found themselves gradually transformed into agents of otherworldly forces whose priorities differed fundamentally from terrestrial concerns. The process was both necessary for human survival against cosmic threats and destructive to the essential humanity of those who underwent it. The recognition that each new generation of hunters would undergo similar transformation, while believing that their participation was voluntary and beneficial, created a form of perpetual tragedy that affected Gehrman more deeply than any individual loss, as he understood that his role in the process made him complicit in the systematic corruption of individuals whose dedication and courage deserved better outcomes than cosmic servitude could provide. The attempts by some hunters to break free from dream influence or to expose the true nature of cosmic manipulation typically resulted in their elimination or neutralization through methods that appeared accidental or justified, while serving to reinforce the apparent legitimacy of dream operations and the benefits they provided to human civilization. The cosmic intelligence that governed these activities possessed understanding of human psychology that made resistance extremely difficult to organize or sustain. The evolution of hunter doctrine and practice under cosmic influence created forms of knowledge and capability or enhanced human effectiveness against otherworldly threats, while gradually altering the fundamental nature of hunter organizations and their relationship to human civilization. The transformation was subtle enough that it appeared to represent natural development and advancement, while serving cosmic objectives that were incompatible with human independence and self-determination. The accumulation of cosmic influence within human institutions, through repeated cycles of hunter recruitment, training, and deployment, created conditions that made human civilization increasingly dependent on otherworldly guidance and support, while reducing its capacity for independent resistance to cosmic manipulation. The process appeared to strengthen human defenses while actually undermining human autonomy in ways that served long-term cosmic objectives. The awareness that this cycle would continue indefinitely, unless interrupted by intervention that exceeded normal human capabilities, created a form of despair that characterized Gehrman's existence in the dream, as he understood that his continued participation in the process was both necessary for protecting individual hunters and harmful to human civilization as a whole. The impossibility of resolving this contradiction without abandoning his responsibilities created a form of psychological torture that was more refined and effective than any physical punishment could have been. The hope that occasionally emerged from encounters with exceptional hunters who might possess the capability to break the cycle or challenge cosmic control provided brief respite from despair, while typically resulting in even greater disappointment. When such individuals proved susceptible to the same influences that had corrupted their predecessors, the pattern of hope followed by disillusionment created a rhythm of emotional torture that was precisely calibrated to maintain Gehrman's cooperation, while preventing him from developing effective resistance to cosmic manipulation. The mental landscape that Gehrman inhabited during his endless vigil in the hunter's dream represented a form of psychological terrain that no human consciousness had ever been required to navigate, as the combination of cosmic awareness, immortal existence, and complete separation from authentic human relationship created internal conditions that challenged every adaptive mechanism that evolution had provided for maintaining sanity under extreme circumstances. The isolation he experienced transcended simple loneliness to encompass a fundamental disconnection from the flow of time and meaning that gave structure to normal human experience. The wheelchair that confined his physical form within the dream served as both practical necessity and symbolic representation of his spiritual paralysis, as the cosmic forces that had granted him enhanced capabilities had simultaneously rendered him incapable of the free movement and autonomous action that had previously defined his existence. The mechanical device that should have provided mobility instead became a prison that emphasized his helplessness, while its presence in an otherworldly realm where physical limitations could theoretically be transcended highlighted the deliberate nature of his confinement. The memories that filled Gehrman's consciousness during the long hours of waiting between hunter arrivals represented both his greatest treasure and his most exquisite torture, as recollections of authentic human relationships and meaningful terrestrial experiences provided psychological sustenance while emphasizing everything that had been lost through his cosmic transformation. The vivid clarity with which he could recall Maria's laughter or the satisfaction of completing a perfectly crafted weapon created cruel contrast with the artificial nature of his current existence. The workshop activities that occupied his hands, while hunters were absent from the dream, provided familiar rhythms that helped maintain connection to his pre-cosmic identity, while serving as constant reminders of the vast difference between his current situation and the purposeful work that had previously given meaning to his existence. The weapons he crafted, in otherworldly environment, possessed capabilities that exceeded anything he had created during his terrestrial career. But their perfection felt hollow when separated from the human context that had made such work meaningful. The garden that surrounded the workshop became both refuge and reminder. Gehrman found solace in tending flowers that bloomed in soil touched by moonlight, while understanding that their beauty existed only to serve cosmic purposes, rather than expressing natural cycles of growth and renewal that characterized terrestrial life. The artificial nature of even the most beautiful aspects of his environment emphasized the complete separation from authentic reality that defined his existence. The conversations with the Dole provided the closest approximation to human companionship that his circumstances allowed, while serving as cruel mockery of genuine relationship, as her responses were programmed to provide comfort and understanding, without the unpredictability and authentic emotional investment that made real human connection meaningful. The knowledge that her apparent affection was artificial construction, designed to maintain his psychological stability, made each interaction simultaneously precious and heartbreaking. The cycles of day and night that marked the passage of time within the dream operated according to cosmic rather than terrestrial principles, as the otherworldly realm experienced temporal rhythms that reflected the moon presence's activities rather than natural astronomical phenomena. The artificial nature of these cycles emphasized Gehrman's separation from the natural world, while creating temporal markers that helped prevent complete dissolution of his sense of sequential experience. The dreams within dreams that Gehrman experienced during his rest periods created recursive psychological states that blurred the boundaries between memory imagination and cosmic vision, as his consciousness navigated realms that existed within otherworldly environment, while his physical form remained confined to the wheelchair in the garden. These internal journeys provided escape from immediate circumstances, while reinforcing his awareness of the vast cosmic hierarchies that governed his existence. The knowledge of cosmic truths that had been forced into his consciousness through his bargain with the moon presence created a form of intellectual isolation that was as profound as his social separation, as his understanding of reality operated according to principles that no other human consciousness could comprehend or share. The insights that had been granted to him were too vast and alien to be communicated through normal language, while their implications were too disturbing to be shared with individuals whose sanity depended on maintaining conventional perspectives. The responsibility he bore for training hunters, who would likely face corruption or destruction, created a form of moral burden that was carefully calibrated to maximize psychological pressure while preventing him from abandoning his duties through despair or rebellion. The knowledge that his guidance was essential for hunter survival was balanced by awareness that such survival often led to outcomes that were worse than death, while the affection he developed for individual hunters made their inevitable loss more painful rather than easier to bear. The moments of peace that occasionally emerged during his vigil typically occurred when environmental conditions within the dream achieved perfect harmony between beauty, tranquility, and cosmic purpose, creating brief experiences of aesthetic transcendence that reminded him of why existence itself possessed value, despite the circumstances that constrained his particular form of being. These interludes provided psychological relief, while making the return to awareness of his situation more painful than constant suffering would have been. The physical pain that accompanied his confinement to the wheelchair represented not simple disability, but a form of embodied reminder of his cosmic imprisonment, as the discomfort he experienced served no medical or practical purpose. It existed solely to reinforce his awareness of powerlessness and dependence on otherworldly forces for even basic physical comfort. The unnecessary nature of his suffering emphasized the deliberate cruelty that characterized cosmic manipulation of human consciousness. The gradual erosion of his connection to human emotional responses created a form of psychological numbing that served as protective mechanism, while simultaneously representing another form of loss, as his capacity for joy, sorrow, anger, and hope diminished over time, until he existed in a state of detached awareness that preserved cognitive function while eliminating the emotional investments that had previously made existence meaningful. The protection this provided came at the cost of further separation from his essential humanity. The patterns of thought that developed during extended periods of isolation reflected his mind's attempt to create structure and meaning within circumstances that offered neither, while the repetitive nature of his mental activities gradually created cognitive pathways that reinforced cosmic perspectives rather than human values. The subtle alteration of his thinking processes served otherworldly objectives, while appearing to represent natural adaptation to unusual circumstances. The hope that occasionally emerged from encounters with exceptional hunters created brief periods of emotional investment and purposeful activity that broke the monotony of his existence, while typically leading to even greater disappointment when such individuals proved susceptible to the same corrupting influences that had affected their predecessors. The cycle of hope followed by loss was precisely calibrated to maintain his cooperation, while preventing him from developing effective resistance to cosmic control. The self-awareness that allowed him to understand his situation with perfect clarity created a form of intellectual torture that was more refined than simple ignorance would have been, as his cosmic enhanced perception revealed the mechanisms through which he was being manipulated, while his circumstances made effective resistance impossible. The knowledge of his powerlessness was more painful than ignorance would have been while serving cosmic objectives by preventing him from developing false hopes about escape or rebellion. The artistic impulses that emerged during his endless vigil found expression in the weapons he crafted and the guidance he provided to hunters, as his need for creative activity was channeled toward purposes that served cosmic objectives while providing psychological outlet that helped maintain his personality. The redirection of his creative energies toward otherworldly purposes represented another form of subtle corruption that transformed human artistic impulse into cosmic resource. The philosophical reflections that occupied his consciousness during periods of inactivity revealed the fundamental contradictions that characterized his existence, as his enhanced understanding of cosmic realities provided insights into the nature of existence and consciousness, while his circumstances prevented him from applying such knowledge toward purposes that aligned with human values. The wisdom he had gained through cosmic contact was useless for addressing the problems that mattered most to him personally. The acceptance that gradually developed as his primary psychological coping mechanism represented not resignation, but a form of active collaboration with cosmic forces, as he learned to find meaning within the constraints of his situation, while channeling his capabilities toward purposes that served otherworldly objectives. The transformation of resistance into cooperation was achieved through methods so subtle that he retained the illusion of maintaining his essential humanity while actually serving cosmic interests more effectively than open coercion could have achieved. The love that he continued to feel for the human species, despite his cosmic transformation, created the most exquisite form of torture that otherworldly intelligence could have devised, as his affection for humanity motivated him to continue activities that served cosmic objectives, while his awareness of the long-term implications of such activities created constant internal conflict that could never be resolved through any action available to him. The preservation of his human emotional attachments served cosmic purposes, while providing the psychological leverage necessary to ensure his continued cooperation. The crimson moon that rose over Gehrman on that fateful night carried with it the weight of cosmic judgment, as otherworldly forces converged to transform the accumulated corruption of decades into a single catastrophic event that would reshape reality itself within the city's borders. From his Puitar's ethereal vantage point in the hunter's dream, Gehrman witnessed the unfolding of catastrophe with the enhanced perception that cosmic contact had granted him, while experiencing the helplessness of one who could observe but not meaningfully intervene in events that represented the culmination of every fear he had harbored about the ultimate consequences of human cosmic interaction. The transformation that swept through Gehrman's population during those terrible hours was represented not random plague or natural disaster, but the inevitable result of choices made by institutions and individuals who had believed themselves capable of controlling forces that operated according to principles beyond human comprehension. The blood enhancement programs that had promised human advancement had created conditions where cosmic influences could trigger mass psychological and physical changes that converted civilization into nightmare, while the scholarly arrogance that had driven contact with otherworldly entities had opened pathways that could never be closed once the initial barriers had been breached. The hunters who found themselves drawn into the dream during the crisis arrived bearing wounds that went far deeper than physical injury, as they carried with them the psychological trauma of witnessing everything they had, dedicated their lives to protecting collapse into chaos and horror around them. These individuals had entered hunter service, believing that their skills and dedication could provide meaningful protection against otherworldly threats, only to discover that the very institutions they served had created the conditions that made such catastrophe inevitable. The weapons that Gehrman crafted for these desperate hunters during the night of the hunt incorporated otherworldly materials and techniques that reflected both his enhanced cosmic understanding and his tragic awareness that even perfected tools might prove inadequate against threats that transcended physical combat, while the guidance he provided was filtered through knowledge of cosmic realities that made conventional hunter doctrine seem naive and insufficient for addressing challenges that exceeded human categories of understanding. The blood echoes that flowed into the dream during the night carried with them fragments of consciousness and memory from individuals who were undergoing transformation throughout Gehrman, as the barrier between individual and cosmic awareness broke down under the pressure of otherworldly influences. While the insight that hunters gained through exposure to these psychic emanations provided them with knowledge that was necessary for effective action, but corrosive to their essential humanity. The communications that reached the dream from terrestrial sources during the crisis painted a picture of systematic institutional failure, as the healing church found itself unable to address problems that its own policies had created, while the hunter organizations that had been developed to protect human civilization discovered that their enhanced personnel were as susceptible to cosmic corruption as the populations they had been trained to defend. The tactical situation that developed during the night of the hunt exceeded the scope of any contingency planning that human institutions had undertaken, as the transformation of large portions of the population into hostile entities created combat scenarios that required responses for which no doctrine existed, while the breakdown of communication and coordination systems made organized resistance effectively impossible, despite the availability of enhanced weapons and trained personnel. The moral dilemmas that confronted hunters during the crisis reflected the fundamental inadequacy of conventional ethical frameworks for addressing situations where the preservation of human civilization required actions that violated basic principles of human dignity and value, while the time pressure created by rapidly evolving threats made careful moral reasoning impossible even for individuals whose training had emphasized ethical considerations in otherworldly combat. The children who had been born during the period of cosmic influence presented particular challenges for hunters whose original mission had emphasized protection of innocent life, as these young people possessed characteristics that made them simultaneously human and otherworldly, while their transformation during the night of the hunt created beings whose nature defied conventional categories of classification and whose treatment required decisions that no human authority was prepared to make. The ecclesiastical authorities who had survived the initial wave of transformation found themselves facing the collapse of theological frameworks that had provided justification for blood enhancement programs and cosmic contact initiatives, while their attempts to maintain religious authority during the crisis were undermined by obvious evidence that their understanding of divine purpose had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. The scholarly community that had initiated much of the research that led to the crisis discovered that their theoretical knowledge provided little practical guidance for addressing the immediate threats, while their enhanced understanding of cosmic realities made them more, rather than less, susceptible to the psychological pressures that accompanied exposure to otherworldly influences under crisis conditions. The foreign observers who witnessed the night of the hunt from outside Gehrman's borders gained insights into the potential consequences of cosmic contact that would influence their own policies regarding otherworldly research, while the isolation of the crisis within Gehrman's boundaries prevented immediate spread of transformation effects to neighboring regions, despite the obvious implications for human cosmic relations throughout the world. The attempts by various factions to establish communication with cosmic entities during the crisis reflected desperate hope that otherworldly intelligence might provide solutions or guidance for addressing the immediate threats, while such efforts typically resulted in further corruption of human consciousness and additional complications that made effective response even more difficult to achieve. The weapons and equipment that proved most effective during the night of the hunt were those that incorporated otherworldly materials and cosmic understanding, while maintaining design principles that reflected human values and tactical requirements, suggesting that successful resistance to cosmic threats required integration rather than rejection of otherworldly knowledge and capabilities, despite the psychological risks that such integration inevitably entailed. The psychological state of hunters who survived the initial phases of the crisis reflected the extreme stress created by witnessing the collapse of everything they had been trained to protect, while their enhanced capabilities proved both essential for survival and inadequate for preventing the broader catastrophe that was consuming their civilization. The recognition that the night of the hunt represented not isolated disaster, but inevitable consequence of policies and choices that had been made over decades, created forms of despair and self-recrimination among surviving institutional leaders, while their attempts to assign blame and responsibility were complicated by the complex web of decisions and circumstances that had contributed to the crisis. The role of ordinary citizens in the unfolding catastrophe reflected both their helplessness in the face of forces beyond their understanding and their capacity for both heroism and horror when confronted with existential threats, while their transformation from protected population to active participants in violence demonstrated the fragility of civilization under extreme pressure. The emergence of new forms of otherworldly entity during the crisis suggested that the boundary between cosmic and terrestrial reality had been permanently altered, while the characteristics displayed by these beings reflected hybrid influences that incorporated both alien intelligence and human psychological patterns in combinations that had never previously existed. The attempts to establish safe zones and refugee centers during the night of the hunt were complicated by the difficulty of distinguishing between genuinely unaffected individuals and those who carried dormant corruption that could manifest under appropriate triggering conditions, while the resources required for supporting displaced populations exceeded the capacity of surviving institutions to provide. The documentation efforts undertaken by surviving scholars and church officials during the crisis reflected their recognition that the events of the night of the hunt would have implications that extended far beyond immediate survival concerns, while their attempts to preserve records and testimony were hampered by the otherworldly influences that made reliable observation and memory increasingly difficult to maintain. The prayers and rituals that various groups employed during the crisis reflected their desperate search for meaning and intervention within circumstances that challenged fundamental assumptions about divine purpose and cosmic order, while the failure of traditional religious responses to provide effective protection or comfort forced many individuals to develop new forms of spiritual understanding that incorporated otherworldly realities. The children who were born during the night of the hunt, or shortly thereafter, displayed characteristics that reflected the permanent alteration of human potential that cosmic influences had created, while their existence raised questions about the future of human development that no existing institutional framework was prepared to address through conventional policies or programs. The knowledge that similar events could occur in other locations under appropriate conditions created strategic concerns that extended far beyond Gehrman's borders, while the apparent impossibility of preventing such occurrences through conventional preparatory measures suggested that human civilization might need to undergo fundamental changes in order to survive in a universe where cosmic entities took active interest in terrestrial affairs. From his position in the hunter's dream, Gehrman observed these events with the enhanced perception that cosmic contact had provided, while experiencing the profound helplessness of one whose knowledge exceeded his capacity for meaningful intervention as the tragedy unfolded according to patterns that cosmic intelligence had foreseen. but human wisdom had proven inadequate to prevent or substantially mitigate, despite decades of preparation and institutional development. The hunter's nightmare that emerged as a direct consequence of the atrocities committed at the Fishing Hamlet represented a form of cosmic justice that operated according to principles fundamentally alien to human concepts of punishment and redemption, while serving as eternal prison for those whose actions had violated the delicate balance between terrestrial existence and otherworldly forces. From his vantage point in the hunter's dream, Gehrman possessed awareness of this nightmare realm and the suffering it contained, while bearing the terrible knowledge that his own guidance and training had prepared the very hunters who would eventually be condemned to endless torment within its borders. The creation of the nightmare realm reflected the accumulated rage and anguish of the Fishing Hamlet's destroyed population, whose connection to the cosmic entity cause had granted their suffering a form of otherworldly permanence that transcended normal death and decay, while their collective desire for justice manifested as a dimensional space, specifically designed to provide eternal punishment for those responsible for their destruction. The realm existed as a twisted reflection of terrestrial reality, where the natural laws that governed normal existence had been replaced by principles that ensured maximum psychological and spiritual torment for its inhabitants. Ludwig the Holy Blade, who had once embodied the highest ideals of hunter dedication and moral purpose, found himself transformed within the nightmare into a grotesque fusion of human consciousness and bestial form that preserved his noble intentions while subjecting him to eternal awareness of his physical corruption and the failure of everything he had believed would protect human civilization from otherworldly threats. His condition within the nightmare represented the ultimate tragedy of cosmic contact, as his pure motivation and selfless dedication had proven insufficient to protect him from influences that operated beyond human understanding of cause and consequence. The relationship between Ludwig's earthly career and his nightmare existence revealed the subtle ways in which cosmic corruption could transform virtuous intention into destructive action, while maintaining the psychological patterns that had originally motivated noble behavior. His development of the Healing Church Hunter organization had been guided by genuine desire to protect humanity from otherworldly threats, while his methods had inadvertently created the very conditions that made large-scale cosmic corruption possible through systematic blood enhancement and institutional cooperation with alien intelligences. Lady Maria's presence within the nightmare reflected her eternal punishment for participating in the Fishing Hamlet massacre. Despite her aristocratic moral education and her genuine horror at the actions she had been compelled to perform in service to institutional objectives that had been presented as necessary for human survival against cosmic threats, her consciousness within the nightmare was preserved in a state of perfect awareness, had allowed her to understand the full implications of her choices while preventing her from achieving the peace that death might have provided. The astral clock tower that served as Maria's prison within the nightmare represented a twisted version of her earthly sanctuary, where she had retreated following her participation in the Hamlet massacre, while the otherworldly architecture of the structure created spatial relationships that emphasized her isolation and helplessness. Despite the familiar elements that recalled her pre-nightmare existence, the tower served as both memorial to her earthly achievements and monument to the inadequacy of individual virtue when confronted with institutional corruption. The weapons that Maria employed within the nightmare retained the deadly elegance that had characterized her earthly combat style, while their otherworldly properties reflected the corruption that cosmic contact had introduced into every aspect of hunter methodology, including the tools and techniques that had originally been developed to protect human civilization from alien influence. Her mastery of blood manipulation had become a form of curse that bound her to endless repetition of violence while preserving her awareness of its moral implications. The patients within the research hall represented the ultimate victims of church experimentation, whose suffering had been justified through theological frameworks that presented their transformation as necessary sacrifice for advancing human understanding of cosmic forces, while their current existence within the nightmare served as evidence of the true cost of such research programs and the inadequacy of institutional safeguards for protecting vulnerable populations from exploitation. The scholars who had conducted research within the nightmare version of the research hall continued their work under conditions that provided them with perfect understanding of the implications of their activities, while preventing them from ceasing their experiments or achieving any meaningful results from their investigations. Their eternal repetition of failed research served as punishment, specifically tailored to their intellectual arrogance and their willingness to sacrifice others in pursuit of knowledge that had proven both unattainable and destructive. The hunters who populated various areas of the nightmare retained their combat skills and professional dedication, while being subjected to endless cycles of violence that provided no meaningful purpose or achievement beyond the perpetuation of suffering that served as punishment for their participation in activities that had violated cosmic law, despite their sincere belief that they were serving human interests through their actions. Their continued existence as hunters within the nightmare emphasized the tragic gap between intention and consequence that had characterized much of their earthly careers. The beasts that roamed the nightmare landscape represented not random threats, but specific manifestations of the corruption that had spread through hunter organizations, as blood enhancement programs had gradually transformed dedicated protectors into sources of the very dangers they had originally been trained to combat. The presence of these creatures within the nightmare served both as punishment for the hunters who had created the conditions that made such transformation possible, and as ongoing reminder of the consequences that followed from cosmic contact under inappropriate circumstances. The environmental design of the nightmare reflected cosmic understanding of psychological torture, as the landscape combined familiar elements drawn from earthly locations with otherworldly distortions that created constant sense of recognition, followed by disorientation, while the architecture incorporated spatial relationships that emphasized hopelessness and eternal repetition rather than progress or achievement. Every aspect of the realm was specifically crafted to maximize suffering while preventing adaptation or psychological escape. The temporal dynamics that governed nightmare existence operated according to principles that ensured maximum psychological impact, as inhabitants experienced time in ways that emphasized both the eternal nature of their punishment and their complete helplessness to influence their circumstances through any action or decision available to them. The manipulation of temporal perception served as additional form of torture that went beyond simple physical or emotional suffering to attack the fundamental structures of consciousness itself. The communication between nightmare inhabitants and entities from other dimensional realms reflected the complex web of cosmic relationships that had been created through human otherworldly contact, while providing observers with insights into the hierarchies and power structures that governed alien intelligence operations within terrestrial reality. The nightmare served not only as prison, but as interface between cosmic and human realms that facilitated ongoing otherworldly influence over terrestrial affairs. The artifacts and items that could be discovered within the nightmare provided evidence of the earthly careers and accomplishments of its inhabitants, while their otherworldly properties reflected the corruption that cosmic contact had introduced into human civilization through institutions and individuals who had believed themselves capable of managing alien influences without being fundamentally altered by such contact. These objects served as both memorial and warning about the true costs of cosmic ambition. The rituals and ceremonies that nightmare inhabitants continued to perform reflected their earthly religious and professional training, while their transformation within the alien environment demonstrated the inadequacy of human spiritual frameworks for providing protection against cosmic influences that operated according to principles beyond terrestrial understanding of divine purpose and moral order. The persistence of human behavioral patterns within otherworldly context emphasized the tragic futility of their situation. The music and sounds that characterized the nightmare environment created atmospheric conditions specifically designed to reinforce psychological suffering, while incorporating elements drawn from earthly memories that provided cruel contrast with current circumstances and emphasized everything that had been lost through cosmic contact and otherworldly transformation. The auditory landscape served as additional dimension of torment that attacked consciousness through sensory channels that conventional defenses could not adequately protect. The revelations about cosmic entities and their motivations that became available to nightmare inhabitants through their enhanced awareness created forms of knowledge that were simultaneously valuable for understanding otherworldly threats and psychologically devastating for individuals whose earthly existence had been based on assumptions about cosmic purpose and divine benevolence that proved to be fundamentally incorrect. The knowledge itself became a form of punishment that exceeded physical suffering in its psychological impact. The connections between the nightmare realm and the Fishing Hamlet's destroyed population provided evidence of the ongoing spiritual presence of the massacre victims, whose suffering had been transformed into cosmic force capable of creating and maintaining dimensional space, specifically designed for punishing those responsible for their destruction. Their continued existence within the nightmare demonstrated the permanent consequences that could result from violations of cosmic law, regardless of the earthly justifications that had been offered for such actions. The role of Kos in creating and maintaining the nightmare reflected the cosmic entity's capacity for both protection and vengeance, while demonstrating the complex motivations that characterized otherworldly intelligence responses to human actions that affected cosmic interests or violated alien concepts of appropriate behavior. The Great One's involvement in the nightmare's creation revealed the personal dimension of cosmic justice that went beyond simple natural law to encompass emotional and spiritual elements that paralleled human concepts of moral responsibility. For Gehrman, the knowledge of the nightmare's existence and the suffering it contained represented additional psychological burden that complicated his already difficult existence within the hunter's dream, as his awareness of his former student's eternal torment created guilt and regret that cosmic intelligence had specifically preserved to serve as ongoing punishment for his role in training hunters whose careers had ultimately led to their corruption and damnation, despite his sincere efforts to provide them with moral guidance and practical protection against otherworldly influences. The impossibility of providing meaningful assistance to the nightmare's inhabitants, despite his cosmic enhanced capabilities, emphasized Gehrman's powerlessness while creating additional motivation for his continued cooperation with the Moon Presence, whose otherworldly agenda he served, despite his understanding of its ultimate implications for human civilization and individual human welfare. The nightmare served as constant reminder of what awaited those who opposed cosmic will, while providing evidence of the consequences that followed from insufficient submission to otherworldly authority. The burden of knowledge that Gehrman carried regarding the ultimate fate of most hunters who passed through the dream created within him a desperate need to find some means of breaking the cycle of cosmic corruption that had consumed so many of his former students, while his position as intermediary between human and otherworldly forces provided him with limited opportunities to influence events in ways that might spare individual hunters from the damnation that seemed to await all who became too deeply involved in cosmic affairs. His attempts at redemption operated within constraints so severe that success seemed almost impossible, yet his essential humanity demanded that he continue trying, regardless of the apparent futility of such efforts. The guidance that Gehrman provided to hunters during their training in the dream was carefully crafted to include warnings and insights that might help them recognize and resist the corrupting influences that accompanied otherworldly contact, while avoiding direct statements that would have triggered intervention by the Moon Presence, whose surveillance of dream activities prevented open rebellion or systematic subversion of cosmic objectives. His advice was delivered through indirect suggestion and metaphorical language that allowed perceptive hunters to understand deeper meanings while providing him with plausible justification for his words, if questioned by otherworldly authority. The weapons that he crafted for individual hunters incorporated not only the technical excellence that his cosmic enhanced capabilities made possible, but also symbolic elements and functional characteristics that were specifically designed to remind their wielders of human values and terrestrial connections that might serve as anchors against the psychological drift that accompanied prolonged exposure to otherworldly influences. Each blade and firearm became a form of spiritual protection, as well as practical tool intended to preserve hunter humanity, even under conditions that seemed designed to erode essential human characteristics. The selection of hunters for specific missions reflected Gehrman's subtle attempts to direct individuals away from activities that would expose them to the most corrupting forms of cosmic influence, while ensuring that essential hunter functions continued to be performed in ways that satisfied otherworldly expectations regarding dream productivity and effectiveness. His deployment decisions represented a complex balancing act between protecting individual hunters and maintaining the operational capabilities that the moon presence required from dream-trained personnel. The timing of hunter departures from the dream was influenced by Gehrman's assessment of their psychological state and their resistance to cosmic corruption, as he attempted to return individuals to terrestrial existence before their transformation progressed beyond the point where recovery of essential humanity remained possible. His recommendations regarding return to normal life often conflicted with hunter preferences and cosmic objectives, while his influence over such decisions was limited by the otherworldly intelligence that ultimately controlled access to and departure from the dream realm. The moments of genuine human connection that Gehrman shared with hunters during their training represented both his greatest source of joy and his most effective tool for preserving their essential humanity, as authentic emotional bonds provided psychological anchors that could resist cosmic manipulation, while his personal investment in their welfare motivated them to maintain moral standards and human values despite the pressures they experienced through otherworldly contact and enhancement. The stories and histories that Gehrman shared with hunters during quiet moments in the Dream Garden contained carefully embedded lessons about the dangers of cosmic contact and the importance of preserving human identity, despite the allure of otherworldly power, while his personal accounts of past failures and losses served as warnings about the ultimate consequences of becoming too deeply involved in affairs that exceeded human comprehension and control. The maintenance of the Dream Garden represented one of Gehrman's most significant acts of resistance against cosmic dehumanization, as his careful tending of flowers and maintenance of beautiful, peaceful spaces created environments that celebrated terrestrial values and natural processes, despite their existence within otherworldly realm, governed by alien principles. The garden served as a reminder of what was worth preserving about human civilization, while providing psychological refuge for hunters whose exposure to cosmic influences threatened their connection to earthly concerns. The conversations with the doll that other hunters occasionally witnessed provided them with examples of how authentic emotional connection could be maintained even under circumstances that seemed designed to eliminate such bonds, while Gehrman's obvious affection for the artificial being demonstrated the possibility of preserving love and compassion despite cosmic manipulation and otherworldly control over fundamental aspects of existence and relationship. The rituals and ceremonies that marked hunter advancement within dream hierarchy were subtly modified by Gehrman to include elements that reinforced human values and terrestrial connections, while maintaining the surface appearance of compliance with cosmic expectations regarding appropriate recognition of achievement and progression toward otherworldly objectives. These modifications represented attempts to preserve human meaning within alien frameworks, while avoiding detection by otherworldly surveillance systems. The blood, echoes, and insight that hunters accumulated through their dream activities were accompanied by guidance that emphasized the dangers of excessive cosmic awareness, while providing practical advice about managing the psychological effects of otherworldly contact in ways that preserved essential human characteristics. despite the transformative pressures that accompanied enhanced capabilities and expanded consciousness. The weapons training that hunters received in the Dream Workshop included instruction in techniques and approaches, and emphasized human tactical thinking and terrestrial combat principles, while incorporating otherworldly capabilities in ways that served human objectives rather than cosmic purposes. Gehrman's teaching methods attempted to preserve hunter agency and moral judgment, despite the enhanced capabilities that cosmic contact provided. The philosophical discussions that emerged during extended training sessions provided Gehrman with opportunities to explore questions of identity, purpose, and moral responsibility, with hunters whose enhanced awareness made such conversations both possible and necessary, while their cosmic-influenced perspectives required careful guidance to prevent drift toward alien value systems that would ultimately separate them from human community and terrestrial concerns. The warnings that Gehrman provided about specific cosmic entities and otherworldly phenomena were delivered through indirect means that allowed hunters to recognize and avoid the most dangerous forms of alien contact, while maintaining plausible justification for such guidance within the context of practical hunter training and tactical preparation for otherworldly combat situations. The moments of rebellion against cosmic authority that occasionally emerged during Gehrman's interactions with hunters were carefully managed to provide them with examples of resistance, while avoiding consequences that would have eliminated his capacity to continue protecting future Dream. Pause. When moments of rebellion against cosity to continue protecting future Dream inhabitants through his position as intermediary between human and otherworldly interests. The preservation of human artifacts and cultural elements within the Dream environment represented ongoing acts of resistance against cosmic efforts to eliminate terrestrial influences from hunter training, while providing Dream inhabitants with tangible connections to the human civilization they were ostensibly serving, despite the otherworldly nature of their current existence and the alien objectives that ultimately governed their activities. The education in hunter history and tradition that Gehrman provided emphasized the noble aspects of the profession, while carefully documenting the tragic consequences that had befallen previous generations of hunters whose cosmic contact had led to corruption and damnation. This historical instruction served as both inspiration and warning, while providing context that might help current hunters avoid the mistakes that had destroyed their predecessors. The emotional support that Gehrman provided to hunters experiencing psychological difficulties related to cosmic contact and otherworldly enhancement represented attempts to preserve their essential humanity through therapeutic intervention, while his understanding of cosmic corruption allowed him to provide guidance that addressed problems that no terrestrial counseling could adequately handle. The networking connections that Gehrman facilitated between hunters with complementary skills and compatible personalities created support systems that could survive departure from the Dream, while providing individuals with human relationships that might serve as anchors against cosmic corruption during their subsequent terrestrial activities and otherworldly encounters. The timing and content of Gehrman's final interactions with departing hunters were carefully planned to provide them with maximum psychological protection against cosmic influences, while ensuring that their departure from the Dream occurred under circumstances that offered the best possible chances for successful reintegration with human community and preservation of essential terrestrial values despite their otherworldly experiences. The hope that sustained Gehrman's redemptive efforts, despite their limited success, and the obvious futility of challenging cosmic authority through individual action reflected his essential humanity and his refusal to accept that corruption and damnation were inevitable consequences of cosmic contact, regardless of the precautions that might be taken or the moral frameworks that might be preserved through careful preparation and ongoing support. The recognition that his redemptive efforts might themselves serve cosmic purposes by improving the quality of hunters who emerged from Dream training created additional psychological burden, while raising questions about the possibility of authentic resistance to otherworldly manipulation within systems that had been specifically designed to channel human action toward alien objectives. regardless of the surface intentions that motivated such activities. The gradual accumulation of small successes in preserving hunter humanity, despite cosmic pressure, provided evidence that resistance remained possible, while the tragic failures that characterized most of his redemptive attempts served as constant reminders of the vast disparity between human resources and otherworldly power that made meaningful change extraordinarily difficult to achieve through individual effort or limited institutional modification. The final confrontation that awaited hunters who had achieved sufficient insight to perceive the true nature of their cosmic entanglement represented not the climactic battle that surface observation might suggest, but rather the most profound act of mercy that Gehrman could offer to individuals whose dedication and capability had brought them to the threshold of complete otherworldly absorption. His willingness to engage in lethal combat against those he had trained and protected reflected not betrayal or madness, but desperate love expressed through the only means that remained available to him, within the constraints of cosmic servitude that governed every aspect of his existence. The challenge that Gehrman presented to hunters who chose to refuse the Moon Presence's offer of cosmic transcendence required him to overcome not only his natural reluctance to harm individuals he had come to care for, but also the otherworldly influences that sought to prevent any action that might threaten cosmic objectives regarding human consciousness and otherworldly service. His decision to fight represented an act of rebellion that drew upon reserves of humanity that decades of cosmic manipulation had failed to entirely eliminate, despite the systematic erosion of his agency and identity. The weapons that Gehrman employed during these final encounters incorporated the full extent of his cosmic enhanced capabilities while retaining the fundamental characteristics that reflected his essential humanity and his commitment to principles that transcended otherworldly power and alien manipulation. The burial blade that served as his primary instrument during these confrontations embodied both his role as harvester of corrupted life and his function as liberator of consciousness that might otherwise be condemned to eternal servitude under cosmic authority. The fighting style that he demonstrated during liberation battles reflected decades of experience in otherworldly combat, combined with techniques that could only be mastered through complete integration of cosmic knowledge and human wisdom. While his tactical approach emphasized not victory in conventional sense, but rather the achievement of outcomes that served human interests. Despite the apparent contradiction between combat and compassion that characterized these encounters, the psychological state that allowed Gehrman to engage in what appeared to be attempts to murder individuals he had devoted himself to protecting required him to maintain simultaneous awareness of multiple incompatible truths regarding duty, responsibility, and the nature of mercy itself. While his emotional responses were carefully controlled to prevent the overwhelming grief and guilt that accurate perception of his situation would otherwise have generated. The moment of weapon transformation that marked the transition from peaceful mentor to deadly opponent or served multiple symbolic functions, as it represented both the revelation of capabilities that had been hidden during normal dream interactions and the fundamental alteration of relationship dynamics that occurred when cosmic conflicts became explicit rather than operating through subtle manipulation and indirect influence. The arena that contained their final battle possessed otherworldly properties that reflected the cosmic significance of the encounter, while providing environmental conditions that tested hunter capabilities under circumstances that exceeded normal combat parameters and required integration of all skills and knowledge that had been acquired through dream training and otherworldly contact. The dialogue that preceded and accompanied their confrontation was carefully crafted to provide hunters with final opportunities to understand the true nature of their situation while avoiding explicit statements that would have triggered immediate intervention by cosmic forces whose surveillance of dream activities prevented open discussion of otherworldly manipulation and the alternatives that might be available to individuals who possess sufficient courage and capability to challenge cosmic authority. The techniques that Gehrman employed during combat reflected not only his enhanced physical capabilities, but also his understanding of hunter psychology and the specific weaknesses that each individual opponent possessed based on their training background, personality characteristics, and the particular forms of cosmic influence that had affected their development during dream residency. The progression of battle intensity during liberation encounters was designed to provide hunters with opportunities to demonstrate their full capabilities while ensuring that the final outcome would reflect genuine achievement rather than simple, overwhelming force applied by cosmically enhanced opponent whose victory was predetermined through superior resources and otherworldly support. The moments of apparent mercy that interrupted the combat flow represented Gehrman's attempts to provide hunters with chances to reconsider their choices and accept cosmic transcendence, rather than continuing to pursue liberation that might prove impossible to achieve, despite their exceptional capabilities and their dedication to preserving human independence from otherworldly control. The physical injuries that both participants sustained during these encounters served practical functions in testing hunter resilience and adaptation, or providing Gehrman with evidence of their readiness for liberation that could only be demonstrated through performance under extreme stress, rather than through verbal commitments or intellectual understanding of cosmic dynamics. The environmental effects that accompanied the intensification of their battle reflected the otherworldly nature of the forces that were being contested, while providing sensory evidence of the cosmic significance that their struggle possessed, despite its apparent limitation to individual combat between mentor and student within confined space that seemed isolated from broader consequences. The revelation of Gehrman's true form during the climactic phases of combat demonstrated the extent of cosmic transformation that he had undergone while serving as intermediary between human and otherworldly realms, while his continued ability to function as recognizably human entity despite such alteration provided evidence that complete absorption into cosmic consciousness was not inevitable even under extreme circumstances. The sounds and music that accompanied their confrontation created atmospheric conditions
Accept both the tragedy of the situation and the nobility of purpose that motivated both participants, despite the apparent contradiction between their actions and their underlying mutual affection and respect. The tactical innovations that emerged during extended combat reflected the creative problem-solving capabilities cosmic enhancement could provide when properly integrated with human ingenuity and determination, while demonstrating that otherworldly influence need not eliminate the essential characteristics that made human consciousness valuable and worth preserving. The moment of decisive action that determined the encounter's outcome required hunters to overcome not only Gehrman's formidable combat capabilities, but also their own reluctance to harm someone who had provided guidance and protection while serving as the closest approximation to family relationship that their cosmic-influenced existence had allowed them to experience. The psychological transformation that accompanied successful liberation from cosmic influence manifested not as simple return to previous human state, but as achievement of expanded consciousness that incorporated otherworldly awareness while preserving essential human characteristics and values that provided foundation for authentic agency and moral responsibility. The aftermath of successful liberation created conditions where hunters could perceive the full extent of cosmic manipulation that had characterized their previous existence, while gaining access to capabilities and knowledge that were necessary for continued resistance to otherworldly influence, without requiring ongoing servitude to alien intelligence or abandonment of human community and terrestrial concerns. The sacrifice that Gehrman made through his willingness to engage in liberation combat extended beyond simple physical risk to encompass the emotional cost of harming individuals he cared about, while accepting the possibility that his actions might fail to achieve liberation and would instead result in unnecessary suffering and death without meaningful benefit to human interests or cosmic resistance.
The hope that sustained Gehrman's commitment to offering liberation opportunities, despite their rarity and the enormous personal cost they demanded, reflected his essential humanity, and his refusal to accept that cosmic servitude represented the inevitable fate of all individuals whose capabilities and awareness exceeded normal human limitations. The recognition that successful liberation might itself serve cosmic purposes by producing individuals whose enhanced resistance to otherworldly manipulation would ultimately advance alien objectives through mechanisms too complex for human understanding, created additional layers of uncertainty regarding the ultimate value of liberation efforts, while failing to eliminate the moral imperative that demanded such attempts regardless of their broader implications. The knowledge that liberation required not only successful combat against cosmic champion, but also ongoing vigilance against otherworldly influence throughout subsequent existence, meant that freed hunters faced responsibilities and challenges that exceeded anything that normal human life could have prepared them to handle, while their enhanced capabilities provided tools that were necessary but not sufficient for maintaining independence from cosmic manipulation. The transformation of relationship between Gehrman and successfully liberated hunters from mentor-student dynamic to something approaching equality reflected the fundamental change in their respective positions relative to cosmic authority, while preserving elements of affection and mutual respect that had developed during their time together in the dream, despite the artificial nature of that environment and the otherworldly influences that had shaped their interactions. The continuing existence of the hunter's dream, despite the liberation of individual hunters, served as a reminder that cosmic objectives transcended individual human welfare, while suggesting that meaningful resistance to otherworldly influence would require collective action and institutional change, rather than simply personal liberation achieved through exceptional individual capability and determination. The legacy of liberation attempts, whether successful or failed, provided evidence that cosmic authority was not absolute, while demonstrating the enormous costs that resistance required, and the uncertain benefits that such resistance could achieve, given the vast disparity between human resources and otherworldly power that characterized all conflicts between terrestrial and cosmic interests. The figure that history would remember as Gehrman the First Hunter transcended simple categorization as either hero or victim, as his existence encompassed contradictions that reflected the fundamental impossibility of maintaining pure human identity while engaging with cosmic forces that operated according to principles incompatible with terrestrial values and limitations. His transformation from skilled craftsman to legendary warrior to cosmic prisoner represented not personal failure, but rather the inevitable consequence of humanity's contact with otherworldly intelligence, whose understanding of consciousness and purpose differed so fundamentally from human concepts that meaningful cooperation remained impossible, despite apparent mutual benefit. The hunter tradition that emerged from Gehrman's teachings and example would influence human responses to otherworldly threats for generations, while carrying within it the seeds of corruption that had ultimately consumed its founder, as each successive generation of hunters faced the same fundamental choice between effective action against cosmic threats and preservation of essential humanity. The weapons, techniques, and philosophical frameworks that he developed provided humanity with tools that were necessary for survival in a universe where otherworldly entities possessed resources and knowledge that far exceeded human understanding, while the costs of employing such tools remained too high for any human institution to pay without fundamental alteration of its essential character. The tragic irony that characterized Gehrman's ultimate fate reflected broader patterns that governed human cosmic interaction, as individuals whose dedication to protecting humanity made them most valuable for otherworldly service found themselves gradually separated from the very population they sought to protect, while their enhanced capabilities created dependencies that made escape from cosmic influence increasingly difficult to achieve through conventional means. His imprisonment within the hunter's dream served simultaneously as reward for exceptional service and punishment for maintaining human values that conflicted with otherworldly objectives. The weapons that bore his influence and the hunters who carried forward his teachings represented both his greatest achievement and his most profound failure, as they embodied the excellence that human dedication and cosmic enhancement could achieve while serving purposes that ultimately threatened the survival of human civilization as an independent entity capable of determining its own destiny. The dissemination of his methods throughout human society created capabilities that were essential for resistance to otherworldly threats, while introducing influences that gradually eroded the human characteristics that made such resistance meaningful. The relationship between Gehrman and the moon presence that defined his cosmic imprisonment provided insights into the nature of otherworldly intelligence and its approach to human consciousness as entities whose existence transcended normal categories of space and time, possessed understanding of human psychology that allowed them to create arrangements that appeared beneficial while serving alien objectives that remained hidden until escape became impossible. His experience demonstrated that cosmic entities could achieve more effective control through apparent cooperation than through overt domination. The garden that served as his prison within the hunter's dream represented the perfect fusion of beauty and cruelty that characterized cosmic manipulation of human consciousness, as the peaceful environment provided genuine comfort while emphasizing his complete separation from authentic human experience and his helplessness to influence events beyond the otherworldly realm that contained his existence. The flowers that bloomed in otherworldly soil served as monuments to everything that had been lost through cosmic contact, while their beauty made acceptance of imprisonment psychologically bearable. The doll who provided companionship during his eternal vigil embodied the sophisticated understanding of human emotional needs that cosmic intelligence possessed, while demonstrating the impossibility of achieving authentic relationship under circumstances that were fundamentally artificial, manipulated by otherworldly forces whose priorities differed from human concepts of love and friendship. Her presence served as both comfort and torture, as she provided the appearance of connection while emphasizing his isolation from genuine human community. The hunters who passed through the dream during his tenure as cosmic intermediary represented the human cost of otherworldly protection, as individuals whose courage and capability made them valuable for cosmic service found themselves gradually transformed into agents of alien intelligence, whose understanding of human welfare differed fundamentally from the values that had originally motivated their decision to become hunters. Their training prepared them for effectiveness against otherworldly threats, while separating them from the human communities they were meant to protect. The knowledge that Gehrman accumulated through decades of cosmic contact provided him with understanding of otherworldly reality that exceeded anything that normal human experience could achieve, while creating forms of awareness that made normal human concerns seem trivial and temporary, in comparison to cosmic perspectives that operated on scales where individual human lives became essentially meaningless despite their apparent significance from terrestrial viewpoints. The attempts at redemption that characterized his interactions with individual hunters reflected his refusal to accept that cosmic corruption was inevitable, despite overwhelming evidence that otherworldly influence ultimately transformed all who came into extended contact with alien intelligence, regardless of their original intentions or moral foundations. His efforts to preserve hunter humanity represented both noble dedication and tragic futility, as the forces he opposed possessed resources that made meaningful resistance extraordinarily difficult to achieve. The liberation battles that marked his final interactions with exceptional hunters represented the ultimate expression of love, transformed into violence, as his willingness to engage in lethal combat against individuals he had trained and protected demonstrated the extremes to which cosmic imprisonment had driven him, while providing the only form of mercy that remained available within the constraints of otherworldly servitude. The wheelchair that confined his physical form within the dream served as symbol of spiritual paralysis that characterized his existence as cosmic prisoner, while emphasizing the deliberate nature of his confinement by entities whose power could have provided him with any form of existence, chose to grant. His physical limitation represented not medical necessity, but psychological manipulation, designed to reinforce his helplessness and dependence on otherworldly authority. The music that accompanied his presence within the dream created atmospheric conditions that reflected both the beauty and tragedy of his situation, while providing emotional context that helped dream inhabitants understand the complex nature of their relationship with cosmic forces and the personal costs that cosmic contact demanded from those who served as intermediaries between human and otherworldly realms. The legacy that Gehrman left for human civilization extended far beyond the specific techniques and weapons that bore his influence to encompass fundamental questions about the acceptable costs of survival in a universe where otherworldly entities possessed the power to reshape consciousness itself according to alien priorities and objectives. His experience provided evidence that cosmic protection came at prices that might exceed the value of what was being protected, while demonstrating that alternatives to cosmic dependence might not exist, given the vast disparity between human and otherworldly resources. The hope that sustained him through decades of cosmic imprisonment reflected essential human characteristics or that otherworldly manipulation had failed to eliminate, despite systematic efforts to transform him into purely cosmic agent whose priorities aligned with alien objectives rather than human welfare. His persistence in offering guidance and protection to hunters, despite the futility of such efforts, demonstrated the resilience of human values even under circumstances designed to destroy them. The garden where he would spend eternity, tending flowers that bloomed in otherworldly soil, while waiting for hunters who would arrive, seeking purpose, and finding only the inevitability of their own transformation, represented the perfect synthesis of beauty and horror that characterized cosmic interaction with human consciousness. His eternal vigil served as both memorial to human potential and warning about the costs of cosmic ambition, while providing evidence that some forms of love transcended even otherworldly manipulation and alien control. In the end, Gehrman's story revealed fundamental truths about the nature of heroism and sacrifice in a universe where cosmic forces possessed the power to transform noble intention into alien service, while preserving enough human awareness to ensure that such transformation was experienced as tragedy rather than simple absorption into otherworldly consciousness. His fate served as both inspiration and warning for those who would follow in his footsteps, while demonstrating that some prices were too high to pay, regardless of the benefits they might provide for human survival and advancement. In the ethereal twilight of the hunter's dream, where time flows according to otherworldly rhythms, and the boundaries between memory and reality dissolve into gentle mist, there exists a garden that serves as final sanctuary for consciousness, seeking rest from the burdens of cosmic awareness and the weight of otherworldly knowledge. Here among flowers that bloom in soil, touched by alien moonlight, the first hunter tends his eternal vigil, while the whispers of wind through impossible trees carry echoes of all the stories that have unfolded within this realm between worlds. The white flowers that carpet the garden paths possess petals soft as morning mist and fragrant as forgotten dreams, while their roots draw sustenance from earth that remembers every hunter who has walked these grounds, seeking purpose and finding transformation beyond anything their mortal minds could have conceived. Each bloom represents a moment of peace, stolen from the endless cycle of hunt and horror, while their collective beauty creates an atmosphere of tranquil melancholy that soothes even the most troubled consciousness. The workshop that stands at the garden's heart continues its ancient function as forge and sanctuary, where the tools of otherworldly combat are crafted with care that transcends mere technical excellence to encompass love for those who will wield them in battles against forces that threaten the fragile light of human consciousness in a universe vast and strange beyond mortal comprehension. The sound of hammer on otherworldly metal creates rhythms that speak of dedication persisting through endless cycles of hope and loss. The doll who moves through this peaceful realm with grace that seems to embody the very essence of compassion provides companionship that transcends the artificial nature of her creation, to offer genuine comfort to consciousness, weary from exposure to cosmic truths that challenge every assumption about the nature of existence and meaning. Her presence serves as reminder that love can persist even under circumstances that seem designed to eliminate all possibility of authentic connection. The grave markers, scattered throughout the garden, stand as testament to the courage of those who chose to face otherworldly threats, despite understanding the costs that such choices would demand. While their weathered surfaces catch moonlight in ways that transform stone into silver and memory into benediction for souls who found purpose in protecting something greater than themselves. The pathways that wind through this eternal garden lead not to destinations in any conventional sense, but to moments of understanding and acceptance, where consciousness can find rest from the endless questions that cosmic awareness inevitably generates, while discovering that some mysteries are meant to be embraced rather than solved through analysis or struggle. The fountain at the garden's center flows with water that reflects not the sky above, but the dreams and hopes of all who have sought solace in this place, while the gentle sound of its movement creates rhythms that speak of cycles that transcend individual existence, encompass patterns of meaning that persist even when specific lives and civilizations fade into the vast tapestry of cosmic time. The benches placed throughout the garden offer spaces for contemplation, where consciousness can rest while processing experiences that exceed normal human categories of understanding, and finding ways to integrate cosmic awareness with essential human values that provide anchor against the dissolution that threatens all who venture too far into otherworldly realms. The trees that shelter this peaceful space possess branches that seem to reach toward stars, invisible from earthly perspectives, while their leaves whisper secrets that comfort rather than threaten. Consciousness already burdened with knowledge of cosmic realities that dwarf human concerns, while somehow making individual experience more rather than less meaningful. The air itself within this garden carries fragrances that speak of home and safety and belonging, while gentle breezes provide caress that soothes consciousness worn by exposure to alien influences and otherworldly manipulation that seek to reshape human awareness according to priorities that have no connection to terrestrial values or earthly concerns. The light that illuminates this eternal realm comes not from sun or star, but from sources that reflect the accumulated wisdom and compassion of all who have found themselves caught between human and cosmic realities, are choosing to preserve rather than abandon the essential qualities that make consciousness valuable, regardless of the forces that seek to corrupt or transform it. The silence that pervades the garden speaks more eloquently than words of peace that transcends understanding, and rest that goes beyond simple cessation of activity to encompass acceptance of mysteries that cannot be solved and burdens that cannot be set aside, but can be borne with grace when shared with others who understand the price of knowledge and the cost of cosmic contact. The seasons that mark the passage of time within this otherworldly realm follow patterns that reflect not earthly astronomy, but the deeper rhythms of consciousness itself, as awareness moves through cycles of struggle and rest, learning and acceptance, hope and resignation, while finding that each phase possesses its own form of beauty, when viewed from perspectives that encompass rather than resist the fundamental uncertainty that characterizes existence, in a universe where cosmic forces shape destiny according to principles beyond mortal comprehension. Here in this garden where the first hunter tends his eternal vigil, consciousness can find the rest that comes not from escape or denial, but from acceptance of truths too vast for individual understanding, while discovering that peace remains possible, even under circumstances that seem designed to eliminate all possibility of comfort or hope. The flowers continue to bloom in otherworldly soil, while gentle winds carry whispers of stories that speak of courage and sacrifice and love that persists even when transformed by cosmic forces beyond imagination or control. In this eternal garden where time itself becomes a form of blessing, rather than burden, consciousness can rest, while the hunt continues in dimensions beyond dreams, and the garden eternal offers sanctuary for souls seeking peace in a universe vast and strange and beautiful beyond mortal comprehension. May you find rest in the garden of memory, where the first hunter tends his eternal vigil, and the flowers bloom in moonlight, that speaks of peace beyond understanding and love that transcends even cosmic manipulation. Sleep well, knowing that some stories never truly end but become part of the eternal garden, where consciousness can rest, while the mysteries of existence unfold in their own perfect time.